I don't know where
James. Please welcome to the stage Daniel Finkelstein and Jeremy Hunt.
Well, good morning, everyone. I have with me the Shadow Chancellor. He's had one of the great political careers of modern times. He's been Culture Secretary, Health Secretary, Foreign Secretary, and of course Chancellor of the Exchequer, and a member of the Cabinet for more than a decade. And not the least of his achievements was the personal vote that helped him achieve one of the most remarkable constituency results at the last general election. So, ladies and gentlemen, Jeremy Hunt. Shadow Chancellor, let me start by asking about our economic position. So Labour says things will get worse before they get better. Is that a picture you recognise?
Well, they will get worse if Labour makes catastrophic mistakes in the budget and hikes up tax in a way that destroys growth. And I think one of the biggest lies we've had since Labour came to office is this nonsense about having the worst economic inheritance since the Second World War. I note that not a single independent economist has been prepared to come forward and back up Rachel Reeves in that claim. And the reason is very straightforward. I mean, inflation 2%, jobs, a succession of Conservative governments that created 800 jobs for every single day that they were in office. And on growth, it wasn't just the fastest growth in the G7 when Labour took over, but the International Monetary Fund said that over the next 6 years, we are projected to grow faster than France, Germany, Italy, or Japan. So, I mean, that is a legacy, frankly, that I would have died to have when I became Chancellor. I think the economy's got very solid foundations. My worry is that Labour believes its own propaganda and starts taking a whole series of decisions, particularly on things like capital gains tax, which have a massive impact in deterring the investment in the economy that we really need.
What about they've got a specific claim about the budget, as you're aware, and I know you've combated Rachel Reeves quite a bit about this. So explain why it's not the case, in your view, that we have a £22 billion black hole in the budget that Labour now has to fill at the budget.
Well, you don't have to take my word for it. I mean, just read this week's Economist, where there's an article saying that she could actually have not a black hole of 22 billion, but a surplus of 39 billion to play with in the budget. The Financial Times did a Freedom of Information request to the Treasury to ask where this fictitious 22 billion number came back. And the reply they got back from the Treasury was, we can't give you the workings because we're not sure they're accurate. Even the Labour Party don't believe it, otherwise they wouldn't be having this massive row over the winter fuel allowance. But, I mean, the real concern I have is that since July the 5th, when Labour came to office, they have talked about difficult decisions, but actually they have not taken those decisions. Instead, they've spent all their airtime attacking their predecessors. Now, we lost that election. We accept that. We have a lot of learning to do. We've got a long journey to go on. But governing is about doing difficult things, making the arguments for those things. And about that, we have had nothing. And when it comes to the big decisions we need to secure our economic growth for the future, I think people are beginning to wonder whether Labour actually has a plan at all, because we have had absolutely nothing in the 12 weeks that they've been in office.
So I've been pretty dubious about the £22 billion claim, but what I've been more interested in and more impressed by is both the OBR and the Institute for Fiscal Studies talking about the medium-term position in tax and spending and saying, if we go on as a country as we are, we simply won't be able to fund our commitments in the medium term. So at some point, political parties are going to have to confront either that we're making too big state commitments or that we're not financing them enough. And that obviously causes a problem for a political party that wants both higher spending or at least that wants better public services and at the same time wants lower taxes. So first of all, is this, before sort of asking you how you might solve this, is this analysis something that you accept?
I do, and I think everyone knows in their heart of hearts that if you're looking 10, 20, 30 years ahead with an ageing population and all the pressures on the NHS and the care system, and then you look at what Putin is doing in Ukraine and the desperate need to put more money into defence and get our European friends to put money into defence as well, then there's a lot of pressure, longer-term pressure on public finances. Now, what the OBR said in their analysis, which I thought was the crucial thing, everyone talked about this, 300 trillion gap that there was going to be, but what they also said was if we increase our productivity growth by just 1% a year ahead of current levels, then the entire gap disappears. And that was why in the budget I said, well, look, what's the obvious thing for the government to do? Start with the 20% of the economy that we directly control, the public sector. And that was why we announced our public sector productivity programme, starting with the NHS and that big investment of £3.4 billion that we gave to the NHS to improve its IT systems. Now, public sector productivity generally, that is a really good example of the kind of difficult decision that a good government is really going to have to get to grips with. But what do we get from this Labour government? £9.4 billion public sector pay rise, double inflation, triple inflation, in the case of the junior doctors, 9 times inflation, without asking for a single improvement in productivity in return. So if you do the maths, just pumping 9 billion more into public sector pay is going to reduce public sector productivity at a time when it is already 6% lower than it was pre-pandemic. So that is not taking a difficult decision, that is ducking a difficult decision on the issue productivity that most economists say is the most important one for the economy if we're going to raise living standards.
But, one would have to look back at the history of government attempts to increase the trend rate of growth and say it's not a very impressive record. And Conservatives are very sceptical about, government's ability to simply magic that up. If you'd been re-elected as Chancellor of the Exchequer, do you have confidence that you would have been able to actually achieve that? And what would you have done?
I do, actually, because, if you look at the NHS, for example, if we just take the public sector for a moment, and then I'll look at the private sector and the overall growth. In the NHS, between 2010 and 2019, during which I was Health Secretary for 6 of the 9 years, we got productivity growth to 1.5% a year. And the agreement I struck with the NHS at the budget this year was that they would get it to 2% a year. So it's raising their game, but I don't think it's raising it unreasonably from what they were delivering pre-pandemic. If you look at the economy as a whole, how are we going to improve productivity? I mean, we're in the age of AI. Thanks to the efforts of successive Conservative governments, the UK now has the 3rd largest tech sector in the world after the United States and China. And I would say, how are we going to, in the long run, pay for things like the NHS and our armed forces? We've got to try and become the world's next Silicon Valley, and I think we've got a real chance of doing so. But again, what was one of the first decisions the new government took? To cancel the exascale computer project at Edinburgh University, which was one of the things that was going to give us a commanding position in AI.
Yeah, how realistic was it that a Conservative government had been re-elected would have been able to engage in the sort of tax cutting we talked about at the general election? Because it looked to me like we were facing quite a difficult, both strategic and tactical problem in public spending and tax cutting. The demographic problem you've already talked about. Conservatives talk a lot about tax cuts, and you'd have to do all the things that you talked about in productivity, even to stand still. So, you know, people like the Resolution Foundation argue are the ability of any political party to sort of float itself politically on tax cuts. It's just gone. Is that an analysis you would recognise?
Well, look, I think it is going to be, of course, a challenge to bring down the tax burden. We'd started on that journey, and you know, I don't pretend that it doesn't require difficult decisions, but it's a very important strategic decision. If we want to be a dynamic economy, you know, Conservatives look around the world and we say that the countries that are growing the fastest in North America and Asia tend to be ones with lower tax burdens. In the case of the UK, the difficult thing that we need to reform, which would both fund that, but is also very good for the economy and indeed for society, is to tackle the problems that we have in our welfare state. And in particular, the fact that every year since the pandemic, we've been signing off 80,000 people a year who we say are not just too ill to work, but they're too ill even to consider looking for work. So they are automatically signed off, and only 1% of that cohort get back into the world of work every month. So it comes down very, very slowly. So my worry about the last 12 weeks is that Labour have got themselves so badly burnt with the mess they've got into over winter fuel allowance that welfare reform will now become untouchable for them, because they just won't want to have, I mean, you know, if they worried about a battle with the Labour Party on, you know, benefits paid to pensioners, including wealthier pensioners, you can imagine how challenging it will be to tackle the bill for working age disabled people, which is due to increase by £25 billion a year, £25 billion a year over the next 5 years. It's a huge, huge increase. But, you know, the argument we Conservatives make is that if you do have mental health issues, one of the worst possible things is to be signed off having to look for work, because that means your isolation is likely to increase and your mental health problems are likely to get worse. So that is a very, very crucial area, both for public finances and also if we want to reduce the dependence on immigration in the economy, that really needs to be tackled. And, you know, I think as Conservatives in opposition, we have got to be making the case strongly that those are the kind of difficult decisions the government should be taking.
So Labour's going to introduce more employment rights, which I think the Conservative Party will attempt to argue, you know, I think correctly, that this will reduce the growth they're hoping to promote. But it's also a political trap, obviously. Once it's introduced, it'll be very difficult to reverse. And the Conservative Party will find itself opposing rights that people will like. So how does one navigate politically, first of all, the stance initially, balancing the growth versus the fact that people like these rights, and then the strategic problem, once you've opposed them, do you promise to reverse them? Do you get stuck?
Well, these are calls where we have to recognise, you know, we were beaten fair and square in the election, and, you know, we have to think like an opposition. And all I would say is that, you know, when you think like an opposition, the reason that the electorate changed their mind about you and decide that having thrown you out, actually they want to trust you again, is if they can see that you are advocating proper solutions and not always the easy solutions. So I think it's very important as we embark on this new chapter that we don't always jump on the easiest bandwagons, because the electorate are watching carefully. So I think on all these issues, if there's a principal case to make that the changes Labour are making are going to damage employment, mean fewer jobs, mean unemployment goes up, then of course we should make that case. But what we need to remember more than anything else, I think that sadly every Labour government in history has left with unemployment higher than when they arrived in. I think if they do what Angela Rayner wants, that will happen to this government. We need to be the party that has the solution to these problems and does so in a credible way.
Let me ask you a couple of questions that relate to your, to your success as a candidate at the election, but also to the party's broader lack of success in the general election. First of all, your own. You held off the Liberal Democrats, and now there's this debate in the party. Does the party need to face towards the Liberal Democrats and get votes back from the Liberal Democrats that it lost, or does it need to fight reform? Some people say, obviously, we need to do both. Mathematically, you can see that that's the case, but it's very difficult to do that. So what does it do in this dilemma?
Well, I think first thing to say is that a number of the people who were part of my campaign in Godalming and Ash are in the audience. And can I just take the liberty of asking everyone to give them a big round of applause, because they did an amazing job. I think the answer to that question, without sounding too much like Boris and having your cake and eating it, is that we need votes from all those groups. We need reform votes, we need Liberal Democrat votes, we need the votes of people who stayed at home, and the trap to fall into, and it is a trap, is to think that as people get fed up with the Labour government, and judging by the last 12 weeks, that's starting to happen far more quickly than people were expecting. But as they get fed up, to assume that they will automatically come back to us. We were trounced at the election. We got ourselves into a position where, and this is a very uncomfortable thing for Conservatives, but we got ourselves into a position when people looked at the problems the country faced and the problems in the NHS and the cost of living crisis and all these things, challenges with immigration, and they began to think that we were part of the problem, not part of the solution. That is very uncomfortable. Now, I know, and you know, everyone in this hall knows, that we've faced the most enormous global challenges over the last 14 years. We took the tough and difficult decisions to get the country back on track, but it doesn't work just to tell that to the electorate. We tried that at the election. We now have to earn their trust and show that we have listened. And if we win that big argument, the argument that we are actually prepared to take the difficult decisions that will secure the extraordinary future of this country, that it's our potential to do so, then we will start to get voters back from left, right and centre. If we follow a narrow political strategy of saying we're just going to go for this group of voters on this issue and that group of voters on that issue, people will think we're thinking about ourselves, not about the country. So that's why I think I am actually very encouraged when I listen to what our 4 outstanding leadership candidates are saying. They are thinking about those big issues. They are getting into the mindset that we had in 2005 when I was first elected. How do we win this argument so that we can get back into office in 1 term and not 2 or 3 as happened before?
And just last thing, Theresa May argued this week in my paper in the Times that elections are won in the centre. There are some people who say, look, that is an old analysis. We're in a different world now after Brexit. Do you still think she's right?
She is absolutely right that we will not win the next election if we say all we want is this group of voters on this part of the spectrum, and that will get us, over 40% in the polls. You need to win a broader argument with the country. And this is what I would say, and maybe it's a slightly different way to the way that Theresa put it, but I think it's probably arguing the same thing. What is the biggest challenge we face as a party? Our biggest strategic challenge is the fact that the average age above which you are more likely to vote Conservative than Labour is now over 60. If we are the party of aspiration, we have to have a message for 30-somethings, 40-somethings starting out on their life who are prepared to work hard, who are Conservatives to their fingertips in their values, in the way they lead their lives, in their belief in all the things that all of us believe in. We have to have a message that appeals to them. So I would say, as we rebuild our trust with the British people, a litmus test of whether we are on track is whether we are starting to do things that rebuild confidence, trust and excitement amongst those generations, because they're not just the future of the country, they're the future of our party as well.
Jeremy Hunt, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you.
For our first member debate on immigration and border security, please welcome Julian Ellicott and Paul Hogan.
Good morning, everyone, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the first of our member debates. And as has been widely trailed, this is the first time this has been brought back for many years, and I'd like to particularly pay tribute to our party chairman, Richard Fuller, for pursuing this. I remember when I first joined my first party conference in Bournemouth in 2000 as a fresh-faced 21-year-old. And I took part in a member debate on local government, queued up by the side of the stage, filled in the slip of paper, and came up on stage to say my piece. So I'm thrilled to be chairing this first of four this morning. With me, I have Paul Holmes MP, who is our Shadow Immigration Minister. And as you've heard, our topic this morning is on immigration and border security. So really, without further ado, we will go straight into introducing our speakers and asking them to come up and get ready to speak. So we have four scheduled speakers, and I'd like to ask the first one of these to come up and be ready to speak at the lectern, and the other three just to queue up at the front of the stage. So we have Brandon Thorne from Wales, we have Danny Shaw from Stourbridge, we have Tony Smith from Croydon, and Dan Sillett from Bury St Edmunds. And I'd like to welcome Brandon to say his piece. Brandon, welcome.
Thank you. So I've got a question at the end, but I just want to say my piece and then ask you if that's okay. Thank you. 3 minutes. Thank you. Today, the UK faces an immigration crisis like we've never seen before. In 2023, net migration skyrocketed to nearly 700,000, up from 180,000 in 2019. The strain on the public services, the housing and communities is unstable, and the British people are feeling the effects of this surge. But let's be clear, this crisis was not just created overnight, nor is solely the fault of the Conservative Party. The roots of the crisis go back to Labour's decision under Tony Blair to open our borders. This led a sharp rise in immigration without necessary infrastructure and planning. Blair's open-door policy laid the foundation for this chaotic immigration system we see today. Since Labour has done nothing to fix this issue, and they just continue to oppose practical measures to bring immigration under control. But let me stress, this is not about politics. It's certainly not just about hating immigration and immigrants. I believe the Conservative Party believes in fair and managed immigration, and we welcome those who come to the UK legally, respect our laws, and want to contribute to the success of this great nation. Immigration, when done right, enriches our society and strengthens our economy. The Office of Budget Responsibility calculates that they pay in the average learning immigrant who comes into Britain aged 25 costs the country more than $151,000 by the time they could claim a state pension at 66. The OBR estimates that this country's cost rises by almost $500,000 if they live to 80, and more than £1 million if they live to 100. What we oppose is the chaos created by Labour's approach, which encourages uncontrolled immigration and strains on public services we see today, leaving taxpayers to cover the cost. Currently, thousands of asylum seekers are being housed in hotels at our great expense. Possible solutions is obviously stronger borders. We will crack down on illegal crossings, especially small boat arrivals in the English Channel, through tougher enforcement, tightening work and study visas. By reducing the number of low-skilled workers and tightening student visa rules, we can cut net migration. Our economy cannot afford to absorb such large numbers with such consequence. Faster deportations. One of the biggest problems is it's not been sped up enough. By speeding up the deportation of failed asylum seekers, we will clear the backlog and free up resources for those who truly need our help. This will save millions of pounds annually and reduce the burden on our local services. Economic stability. With the UK facing the cost of living crisis, it's vital that we prioritise British citizens.
If you could wrap up, Brandon.
Reducing uncontrolled immigration. By doing this, we can really put the great back into Britain. My question is, how are we going? We've got 5 years to review. How are you going to help rebuild and make this country a great nation once again?
Brandon, thank you very much. That's an excellent start to our member debates. Thank you, Brandon. I now welcome to the stage Danny Shaw from Stourbridge. Danny, welcome.
Good morning, conference. Public sector productivity has been a hot topic for politicians of all stripes recently, and it may seem like an unusual place to start in a debate about immigration. However, from my experience as a frontline NHS professional, I want to share with you my experiences and why I think this is pertinent to this debate. I work in the maternity department about 30 minutes from here. And I stand before you and admit I am less productive than I was this time 5 years ago. I do exactly the same job, but I see less patients, and the patients I do see inevitably take longer. And this is despite hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of capital investment of state-of-the-art hardware, which technically make my job more efficient. One of the main reasons for this downturn in productivity is that on any given day, up to 50% of the people I see in my clinic will have very limited English. And we have to make provision for interpreters to translate sometimes sensitive and complex information. We have to solicit symptoms, feelings, and personal information, and some of which doesn't translate perfectly. And this all has inevitable delays in the care we provide. And I stand before you here today as a concerned NHS worker who sees firsthand the consequence of historic high immigration on our already overstretched public services. It's my duty to care for everybody who walks through the hospital doors. But the reality is that the current state of migration in the UK is having a profound effect on the National Health Service as well as other public services. Now, to be very clear, this is not about vilifying immigrants. I work with some absolutely wonderful people who I'm proud to call my colleagues and are dedicated health professionals and contribute enormously and positively to the health service. But the scale of immigration needs to be manageable. One of the reasons we lost so heavily in July was our failure to listen to the millions of people who had genuine concerns over immigration. And as a consequence, great swathes of former Conservatives put their X in the Reform UK boxes, while many more stayed at home glued to their sofas, unconvinced that any party had what it took to solve the immigration conundrum. And it is only by convincing these people that we have any chance of returning to government at the next election. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danny. Before I call on Tony Smith, I will just point out we are likely to have time for some contributions from the floor, so do get thinking and I'll invite you up after our scheduled speakers. Our next speaker is Tony Smith from Croydon. Tony, come on over.
Yeah, good morning, conference. It's not only my first address to a political party conference, it's my first attendance as one. I was apolitical for over 40 years when I served in the Home Office, all levels from Immigration Officer up to Director General of the UK Border Force between 72 and 2013, governments of many, many colours. I was Director of Ports of Entry in Canada when 9/11 happened. I was Director of Ports of Entry here in the UK when 7/7 happened. And I was Gold Commander for the UKBA London 2012 Olympic Security Programme. And since then, for the past decade, I've been an international border security consultant. So when I saw this opportunity crop up, I thought it's probably too good for me to miss my 2 minutes or 3 minutes and get on the stage and say a couple of things. So when I was an immigration officer back in the day, and I'm talking about the 70s and the 80s, if anybody came up to my desk without a passport, I refused them entry, sent them straight back on the first plane, without a passport, letter to the airline, straight back first plane. I moved into... I moved into immigration enforcement in London. We found a lot of illegal immigrants. Same thing, if they had no passport, couldn't verify their status here, I would arrest them, detain them, remove them. A letter to the captain of the aircraft, a letter to the country they were going back to would suffice, and off they went. Remember, this was all in the 70s, 20 years after the 1951 Conventions on Refugees and Human Rights were signed under the Immigration Act of 1970. So nowadays, ladies and gentlemen, what happens? What happens if someone turns up without a passport or a dodgy one at our borders, or they claim asylum, or they claim human rights, or they claim to be victims of human slavery? Don't blame the border force. We can't send them back. It's illegal. We have to let them into the country while due process takes place. That can take months and years for applications to be considered. And even at the end of all that, they may well have disappeared into the community, or their countries will refuse to take them back. The worst thing of all is we don't know who they are, ladies and gentlemen. It's a myth that these passports have been lost in some conflict somewhere or seized by a government that they come from. They've either been handed over to a human smuggler as collateral, or they've been deliberately destroyed so that we can't remove them. Because you don't know who someone is, you know where they're from, you can't remove them, right? Because nowadays we have to get passports and many countries won't. Worse still, ladies and gentlemen, many of them go on to commit heinous acts after entry which could have been prevented if they were detained, stopped and removed at the border. So without a returns agreement with France, and I've said publicly the Rwanda plan, whilst it was imperfect, it was a bold attempt to break the smuggling business model, only ever achieved once before by Australia. Yet our ability to deliver Rwanda was thwarted by a barrage of judicial interventions supported by the UNHCR and many open borders groups until such time as an election could be called, and the whole thing was called off by the incoming government. So my message here is, let's be bold. I'm not a right-wing thug or a fascist. I love my country. I've served it well for many years. I'm proud to have been honoured for my services to this country for border security. But for our national security and the safety of our children and our grandchildren, we must get back to the future. Undocumented migrants must know that they will be caught, detained and removed swiftly from the territory, just as I did back in the day. Thank you.
Tony, thank you very much indeed for that forceful intervention, and especially from someone with such long experience in the field. I now welcome to the stage Dan Sillett from Bury St Edmunds. Dan, come on to the stage.
Thank you very much, and good morning, conference. It's clear that I've got quite a strong act to follow, so I will do my best. But let's be clear from the very start. We are not opposed to immigration. There's a 1 in 5 chance that the doctor who treats you when you are sick is an immigrant. Again, there's a 1 in 5 chance that the carer who helps our vulnerable elderly relatives is an immigrant, including my own nan, who herself has recently gone into palliative care. So we are not opposed to immigration. It keeps our economy growing and our communities flourishing. But what we are opposed to is illegal immigration. Every day, it costs taxpayers, our taxpayers, us, £8 million, that's every day, to put illegal immigrants into hotels when over 300,000 people, British citizens, spent last Christmas homeless. How is that right? What's more, we know under Keir Starmer this problem will only get worse. He scrapped our Rwanda deterrent, despite saying he would in fact be open to using a third country to deal with illegal immigrants. It wasn't perfect, but any deterrent is better than no deterrent. He voted against our new laws, which arrested over 1,000 criminals during their time. How is that right? And in his robotic repetition of smashing the gangs, he is as useless and as weak as a handkerchief in a hurricane. And we won't mention the return of the sausages or any of the other political gaffes which we have seen in just 12 weeks as Prime Minister. So my question is, what will our party do in opposition in this new era of reviewing and rebuilding to hold Keir Starmer's Labour government to account and secure our borders? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. You did have a hard act to follow, but you followed it very well. So we'll now open up to people who want to approach one of the mics. We've got 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if you've got a contribution to make, then do go to one of the mics and I'll call you accordingly. While you're doing that, I'll just call in Paul Holmes, our Shadow Immigration Minister, for some initial reflections on what we've heard.
Well, Julian, what a fantastic start to our debate, and I'm delighted that we've got these members' debates happening all today. There are 4 people that I've got a big act to follow after those speeches. And Tony from Croydon, I thought that I had a lot of jobs in this shadow government, but you've put me to shame already. Look, a number of the things that have been mentioned are absolutely correct. There is one party in this country that has made a mockery of our immigration system and who are going to make our immigration system worse, and that's the Labour Party. From day one, Keir Starmer scrapped our Rwanda plan. From day one, Keir Starmer has taken away policies that were actually making a difference to the people of this country. You have rightly outlined, all of you, some of the challenges that we face, and our job, to answer some of your questions, our job over the next 5 years under our new leader is to show that the British people that we have those answers and that we have the bold and challenging conversations as we go forward over the next 5 years to make sure that we tackle this problem properly, because I can guarantee to you the Labour Party and Keir Starmer won't.
Thank you very much, Paul. Right, we've got a good number of people queuing up. So if I will point out a microphone and we'll take contributions, please be brief, be concise, say who you are and which association you're from, and then stick to only about 1 minute or so, a couple of key points maximum, so we can get through as many people as possible. So I call the gentleman at microphone number 1 first. Sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Taye Garrick from the Lichfield Conservative Association Fortunately, I was supposed to be speaking this morning. However, I want to agree with the last gentleman that spoke and also partially agree with the gentleman before him. What we are against is not legal migration, it's illegal migration. The small boats are the symbol of the crisis we face here today as a nation. I want to tell you firsthand that I'm an employer of labor and working in the healthcare services. And my good staff, most of my staff that I have in employment are mostly immigrants that have come into this country legally, applied legally, with skills. And they've been able to help, to work well with us, and to work with the individuals that we support. And I can also tell you firsthand that legal immigration contributes significantly to the economy. But what we must do, and we should be doing, is to say, if you come into Britain, if you come into the United Kingdom, illegally, through Alice, through the back door, you cannot stay. And I want us to emulate what's going on in the United States of America, where Kamala Harris is saying, if you come into the United States through the back door, you will not be processed. You will not be given the opportunity to be eligible for asylum. That is what we must do in the United Kingdom. That is what we must do in Britain, to say, if you do not pass through the legal channel, if you do not submit yourself through the front door, you will have no chance at all to be processed, and you will return straight back to your country, just like the way that gentleman, the second to the last speaker said, that it should be returned. If we do this, and they know that there will be no processing of asylum seekers, then they will think twice before the gangs continue to bring them in to destroy the United Kingdom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. The gentleman at microphone number 2.
1, 2, 3. Thank you, sir. I'm a political animal from the age of 10, I kid you not. I come from currently Suffolk Coastal constituency. I've learned over many, many years of observing and participating in politics as a councillor, it's more effective to address the cause of a problem than the results of the problem. All the debate we have, the platform, Starmer, whoever, we're trying to deal with the outcomes of the problem. What is the cause? Why is it that what are the attributes of this company as perceived by immigrants that make it the place to come, to spend thousands of pounds you don't have, risk your life, to come to England? That's the problem. Should we not spend the next few years analysing that, understanding it, and present a solution to the root of the problem, not the symptoms in 5 years' time?
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. The lady at microphone number 3, madam.
Hello. I'm Rosemary Gaskell. I'm from the Leeds East constituency. Our NHS is and always has been dependent on immigrants. Indeed, it is one of the so-called benefits of immigration that our healthcare system would collapse without them. But is it right that we should have encouraged doctors and nurses trained elsewhere to come here to the detriment of their own countries? And it's not just healthcare workers. I was horrified to learn at conference last year that teachers are being recruited from the Caribbean. Why is this? Because we refuse to put in the required effort to train our own people, because it's cheaper. Whatever the reason, it is wrong. We must stop plundering the world of its brightest and best for our own selfish reasons. We should start training enough doctors, nurses and teachers, as well as engineers and scientists, etc., so that we don't need to poach talent from poorer countries that can ill afford to lose it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, madam. And now we go to microphone 4, sir.
Hello, Christian Hacking, independent candidate, Vote Life. Open Democracy and Soros et al. Have been publishing information for migrants, telling them to destroy their documents and giving them other tips in order to hack the system. What steps is the British government, or the potential next Conservative government, going to take in order to address these globalist forces who have no respect for national sovereignty? My second question is, Enoch Powell made what is now a highly conservative speech in the 1968, of which he was smeared and kicked out of the Conservative Party. Are the Conservatives willing to apologise and unsmear his name for what, in hindsight, has been quite a fair and accurate prediction of what came, which is not rivers of blood? He never actually said rivers of blood, but actually, as your man said, heinous crimes have been committed by some of these unidentified individuals. Surely it's about time we said, made a statement saying that Enoch shouldn't have been treated the way he was for the statements he made.
Thank you. We go back now to microphone number 1. Madam.
Okay. My name's Leslie Lewinson, and I'm from Harrow East. And I just want to say, well, I'm an immigrant, and my late parents, they came to the UK as part of the Windrush era to help rebuild the mother country. They worked hard, and they did help the country and did the best for their 2 children, myself and my brother. Presently, there does not seem to be an efficient process to process legal immigration with a backed-up system in the Home Office. On the other hand, illegal immigration has soared. Immigration in the UK has become a political dichotomy, being both a thorny issue and a hot potato. Successive governments have not been able to handle this matter satisfactorily and responsibly, and it's just passed from one Home Secretary to the other. I just want to say that in Italy, the Prime Minister, Giorgio Meloni, has said that they've reduced immigration by 64% by actually going to other countries and having negotiations with them. Is there anything that we could learn that could help us to reduce illegal immigration by looking at the Italians, what they're doing? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Now we go back to microphone number 2, sir.
Thank you. John Cliff, Cheshire Farmer. I'd like to say about debate number 3, I thought that was excellent. We need solutions, that's what it's all about. Why can't we process in the embassies abroad? We have embassies all over the world. We need offshore processing long before anyone gets here, and then adopt the system of debate number 3. That's my first question. Secondly, we have illegals here. Why can't they be tagged, kept track of while they've been processed, the short term, and put to work? I need some people picking potatoes this week. Please. Thank you.
Thank you. And number 3. Go ahead, sir.
Hiya. My name's Will. I come from Dick Cotton Wantage Association. I think it's important to remember how immigration, when done properly, enriches our society. We've had 2 speakers who have both come from immigration families, and they show that they very much have value in our society and they bring so much. Which brings me to my point about how identity politics and sort of multiculturalism has built up barriers within our society where people don't speak to each other, they don't come together, they don't celebrate their cultures together, they kind of adopt a group mentality, and it's sort of fed by the socialist kind of project where your identity is everything. It's how you vote, it's who you are, it's how you move your life. And I think, is it time that the government took a new approach to multiculturalism to kind of come together and sort of try and break down these barriers and try and get people just speaking to each other about their differences in belief and culture, so we can kind of create a new society where we all kind of understand each other's needs and how we can kind of come together as friends and help each other out in life, whilst understanding that we're all different and that yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Right, I think we're back to number one.
Thank you. I was expecting number 4. Richard Hosking. I'm from South Devon and South West Devon. Immigration, as far as I'm concerned, is an issue because of the volume of people that have actually moved to this country over the last 20 years. Our population has increased by 10 million in that period. That's 500,000 people per year, which is over 200,000 houses, additional houses per year as a requirement. We have not managed to do that, as far as I recall, more than once in the past 20 years. That's a huge problem, but the majority of that problem comes from the failure of the natural process of integration to create a cultural and security integration within our country. And that is beginning to have a significant effect, as I see it, on the value of life in the UK. Tony Blair's experiment in multiculturalism, as one of the previous questioners was suggesting, I believe, has failed. Do you agree, is the first question. The second element, which has not been touched upon as yet this morning, is that of the potential for the creation of terrorist cells and for terrorist sleepers as a result of illegal immigration. What are we doing to combat that possibility? Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And time has crept up on us, so we have time for one more contribution. So the gentleman at microphone number 2.
Good morning, gentlemen. Lee Sheldon from Reigate. Oh, I'm not Reigate anymore. I'm sorry, it changed at the last election. The gentleman behind me spoke about the need to address the causes, not symptoms. As a Conservative Party, do we need to look again at digital ID? As an employer, there's a real challenge around, we basically made them immigration officers with the amount of forms you have to check. And one thing I probably would agree with Emmanuel Macron is we are a draw because it's very easy for people to disappear into the black economy. So is that something we need to look at? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lee. Right. That was just a fantastic experiment and a fantastic set of views brought out. So I now hand over to Paul, who has the job of responding to your comments. Paul.
Thank you, Julian, and congratulations to you on your election, and what a great conference so far. Conference, I'm delighted to have been able to hear your views, your challenges, and the opportunities that you outline as our members and how you have given them us this morning. As Shadow Immigration Minister, they've given me a lot to go on, I assure you, and as we shape our offer to the British people going forward. We all know that the UK is a fair and tolerant country, and legal immigration has its place. We have provided safety to people fleeing conflicts and persecution in Ukraine, Hong Kong and Afghanistan. We have welcomed doctors and nurses from around the world into our NHS, and we gladly accepted those who offer their skills and experience to contribute to our economy and our communities. That is always the right thing to do, and we should be proud in our decisions in doing so. But we have been clear that immigration must be sustainable and fair, as Brendan so clearly pointed out in his excellent contribution. And while opening our country to those fleeing Putin's illegal invasion or the Taliban's deadly regime was the right thing to do, we recognise that the levels of immigration were too high and need to come down. And that is what we embarked on doing. And our record shows we were succeeding. In government, we restricted most students from bringing dependent family members. We increased the salary that most skilled worker migrants need to earn in order to obtain a visa by nearly 50%. We stopped overseas care workers bringing dependent family workers with them. We raised the minimum income for family visas to ensure that people are supported financially, and scrapped the 20% going rate salary discount for shortage occupations. And we replaced the shortage occupation list with a new immigration salary discount list. And our plan was working, with net migration down by 10% last year, but we knew there was more to do. And of course, as we have heard today, we all know how important it is to stop the boats, and we were succeeding. That's why we changed the law, so that when people came here illegally, they were not able to claim asylum in the United Kingdom. We forged that treaty with Rwanda to enable us to relocate those who make the illegal journeys. And why we agreed the largest ever small boats deal with France, working internationally to stop the boats. And do you know what, conference? Our plan was working. Small boat crossings were down by over a third in 2023. Our agreement with Albania saw arrivals down by 94%, and flights were ready to take off. But as we all knew, and as we all warned, the election of Sir Keir Starmer and Labour has granted the wish of criminal gangs, and the steps they have taken since office show exactly why. Labour have never been the party of border security. They have no plan, and what's more, they don't even have or haven't shown any interest in having a plan, hoping that the people who elected them will forget their willingness to abdicate their responsibilities on immigration. Remember, conference, on day one, Keir Starmer proudly scrapped our small boats deterrent, leaving us vulnerable to crossings throughout the summer. In just 12 weeks, Labour has welcomed 10,000 migrants across the Channel, and they've only just appointed the head of their Border Security Command after weeks of scrambling to find someone to do the job. Labour have shown they will make the UK a magnet for illegal migrants across Europe, making our country less safe and less secure. And let's not even go into the hundreds of thousands of extra migrants coming to Britain under Keir Starmer's EU-wide agreement plan. Conference, the UK, as we all know, is a tolerant and welcoming country. We must also be fair, however. We have heard many articulate and thoughtful speeches here today that recognise that principle, and I'm grateful for everybody who has shown their ideas with us all. As Conservatives, we will always stand up for strong borders and fair immigration systems. Delivering on that challenge has become harder in opposition, but even more important as we face a Prime Minister who has already shown himself unable to take the difficult decisions that will keep our country safe. Conference, I assure you, we will not stand by. We cannot stand by, and we will not balk at that challenge, and we will lead the way in showing how we can protect our borders, something that the British people want and deserve. In doing so, we will show the leadership, vision and responsibility that in less than 100 days, Labour has abandoned, that in just 100 days, Labour has torn up and forgotten that they work for the British people. We have a duty, Conference, to stand up for what is right, and if we fulfil that duty, Britain will look at us again to deliver for them. Thank you very much. Ready? Yep.
Thank you all very much indeed. Enjoy the rest of the debates.
For our next member debate on protecting free speech, please welcome Fleur Butler and Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Well, welcome to this next exciting stage that we have for protecting free speech. I will be asking the name people to come up first and then throwing it open, but I will request you all please keep it short so we can hear as many of you as possible to make it more valuable for all you members here in the room. So without more ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, who will be listening clearly and carefully and then responding to you all at the end. Jacob.
Well, thank you so much. This is wonderful and exciting at last. The party's putting free speech into action. And you, ladies and gentlemen, you, the real heroes of conservatism, You're the ones who are here. You're the ones who, after an election that did not go entirely according to plan, have come through the rain and the storms to get to Birmingham, to back our party, to remain with the party. Thank you so much. And for the first time in decades, thanks to the great Richard Fuller, the chairman of the party, we're going to have free speech for Conservatives. Thank heavens for that.
Now, without more ado, can we have Colin Towell moving fast, Jane Kendrick from the East Midlands, Peter Marin, from Erith and Thamesreed, and Louis Williams. Could you please come and queue up down here so that we can move you fast onto the stage to get as many of you done as possible? So, can Colin Towell please come, and 3 minutes or less, if I can encourage you. Off you go.
Thank you. I wanted to talk to you today about someone you've never heard of. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a Lutheran pastor in 1940s Germany who sought to understand how his once great country had gone so mad. In so doing, he created a theory of stupidity, which states that stupidity is a social contagion and is more dangerous than evil because it cannot be confronted and defeated as evil can. And it is the mechanism by which evil corrupts and fools good people into doing bad things. This contagion spreads because those who hear the stupidity do not ask the questions of those expounding it. They do not challenge what they are being told, but merely absorb. Often, this is because they are too scared, because stupidity requires you to be scared, because freedom of speech is the enemy of stupidity and the way in which we defeat it. Without the ability to question the dogma spreads and becomes the norm. Good people conform to it because they do not want to say the wrong thing or be seen to hold the wrong ideas. This is why some people call us Tory scum, because they do not want us to put our head above the parapet and challenge their views. This is why you might be called far right or racist for voting for Brexit or expressing concern over immigration, or transphobic for believing physical sex is real and immutable. This is why terms such as Islamophobia were created. It's the purpose behind cancel culture, and the latest one that I heard, which is that the freedom of speech is not the freedom from consequence used to justify all of the above. I find this one particularly insidious, not least because it is based in truth. But what it does is to ignore, however, the fact that not all consequence is justifiable. The consequence for Bonhoeffer of exercising his right to freedom of speech was to be hung in a German prison in April of 1945. Don't know why that makes me cry. We must defend freedom of speech by holding this government to account over the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Bill and its unlawful action in ignoring it. We must defend it by having our national broadcaster justify labelling this group or that far right. I mean, what is far right about going to London to celebrate St. George's Day and wearing an England flag?
If you'd like to now wind up, please. You've got 5 seconds.
5 seconds, okay. We must defend, I have a whole list here, but I'll just crack on. We must defend freedom of speech to hold back the tide of stupidity, because Bonhoeffer witnessed, those who can make us believe a lie can make us commit atrocities.
Now, Jane, if you'd like to come on.
Thank you. I'm just going to start by giving you 3 random facts about myself. I used to be a biology teacher. I've been banned from the Facebook page of my former union. And I'm a big fan of the comedy show Father Ted. So what links these 3 things? Because I was a biology teacher, I know what a woman is. I know that women have 2 X chromosomes. In some quarters, it might be regarded as the wrong thing to say. On my union Facebook page, they advertised Drag Queen Bingo as a social event for newly qualified teachers. In the end, it was cancelled because not enough people were interested. That says a lot, doesn't it? But when it was cancelled, I wrote a comment, "Good, this is demeaning to women." For that comment, I was banned from that Facebook page for a month. Now, I'm a retired teacher, so it didn't make a lot of difference to me. Imagine if I'd still been working. Those people who banned me from that Facebook page could have gone to my employer and said all sorts of things about me. My career could have been over. And this has happened to many people. For making a legitimate statement about biology, about biological fact, their careers have been ruined. Graham Linehan, who wrote Father Ted and many other excellent comedies, had his career ruined, his marriage fell apart, and all sorts of other consequences because of stating a biological fact. There are probably many people who love drag queens, think they're marvellous. They're entitled to that opinion. I don't mind if they have that opinion. I welcome people having different opinions than mine. That's what freedom of speech is all about. But this insidious cancelling of people who have an opinion that you disagree with is very, very worrying. And although, I might have started in a little flippant way, talking about comedies and drag queen bingo and things like that, it goes to the very heart of having opinions and being able to express them. Thank you.
So, Peter Marin.
Do you want to take that?
Peter, if you'd now like to go.
Excellent. I'm going to keep it brief. I otherwise would be preaching to the converted. What a worthy debate to have about this topic. It's particularly pertinent to talk about it today, but it's also interesting to reflect a second on why this topic feels so at home inside of the Conservative Party. Why not with the Liberals or why not with Labour? It's because really and uniquely, freedom of speech is embedded in the DNA of this country. It arguably has been the fuel of some of the most prosperous periods in the history of Britain. And it's important to defend it. Why? Freedom of expression is always fragile. It's fragile because it's very easy to convince ourselves that we're right and our cause is the right one to justify censorship. But really what we perhaps need to do is perhaps build the resilience of each other. Perhaps we need to encourage more healthy disagreement. And that is the tried and tested way to wrestle ourselves towards truth and towards a better future for all of us. Now, I'm going to end with one question to reflect on. Aristotle talks about the golden mean. It's this wonderful place where virtue dwells between deficiency and excess. I like us to think, and I like the panelists to think as well, where do we think this place is for the Conservative Party today? And also critically think, how does this differ from the other parties' ideal position? Now, I might disagree with all of you or where that stands. I might disagree with you on where we position ourselves on the spectrum, but I think all of us agree that we're willing to do what it takes to defend our right to disagree. Thank you.
And now can we have Louis Williams?
Thank you very much. And thank you, conference, for giving me these few minutes. Now, I'm going to take you away from the UK for a moment. I'm Louis. I have a company in Colombia and Spain, and I have a lot of Venezuelan staff. Free speech is not just some hypothetical. I was talking to one of my Venezuelan colleagues just the other day, and she talked her fear of sending a WhatsApp message to her friends. Why? Because Cuban, Nicaraguan, Russian, and Venezuelan Secret Service agents are entering into homes, inspecting people's phones on checkpoints to see what they have said, whether they disagree with the thought police of a government. Now, imagine that fear for one moment. Imagine the isolation. Now, you may think, look, it's a tin pot dictatorship in another country, it's away from home. But conference, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. In the online safety bill that we passed, we left a little crack, granting Ofcom the need for an accredited form of inspecting for child abuse, potential hateful and illegal material. What does this mean? We have given a potential weapon to break encryption. If this was to come to pass and we were to see a development of governments that we do not like today, a government with not Starmer's chaotic leftism, not Liberal Democrat confusion, not even moments of Tory, we don't exactly know what we're doing at times. If we have the threat of a government who starts to push the regulation of what can be said, where can that potentially end? We heard from a colleague talking about a Facebook group where she left a comment, the fear of losing her job. I don't know if you know, but the UK government does not record or break down what part of public order offences and hate crime is hate speech. Over the last 10 years, the number of hate speech recorded offences has tripled. Have a moment to let that sink in. Half of those are for public order, 51% to be precise. Now, many of those may be incredibly indesirable, but should they be banned from being stated? Should we be banning basic speech? Free speech is not about what we all agree with in this house, what things we feel comfortable with. Free speech is about us defending the ability for people to do things we hate, say things we here hate. 2 minutes, I'm done. 5 seconds, I promise. Okay. Think when somebody insults the flag. Think when somebody shouts down an anthem. Think when somebody disparages the values you fundamentally hold. Defend their right to say it. Because once we let that canary die in the coal mine, our very freedoms are threatened. Free speech is absolute. It is not something for what we just agree. Thank you very much, conference, and thank you for your time.
I'd now like to throw this open to the members to come forward. If you'd like to take your places at the blue tags where the microphones are, please, if you will stand in a queue, and I will pick different members of you, so it's not necessarily first come, first serve. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. Jacob, while people are getting themselves organised, if you'd like to give us an idea of what your take so far is.
Well, it's just so important, isn't it, that we hear already that freedom of speech has consequences. We hear what happens to biology teachers who tell the truth, that they get excluded not by the power of the state, but by a culture that doesn't like freedom of speech. We hear from Peter that freedom and prosperity go together and that it's always fragile. And that's something we must remember. And from Louis, that fundamental point, that difficult point, that point that we all find a stumbling block, we must allow people to say things we don't like. Shocking though that is, it's fundamental to freedom of speech.
Now, I think we'll go to number 1. If you'd like to do your 3 minutes, I will ask you to be brief and I will stop you if you overrun.
Thank you very much. My name is Howard Jenkins. I'm from Winchester. I'm a chartered surveyor. Voltaire said, "I do not agree with a word that you say, but I'll fight to the death to defend your right to say it." And I believe that's a world in which I wish to live. I'm very tired of people who are not allowed to say anything that they want to say. Clearly there is offence in a lot of what people say, and I think it's understood when people are being offensive, and people should then be offended. But to have an opinion is our right, and I hope, conference, you agree with me. Thank you so much.
In the line, number 4, the gentleman standing in the check shirt.
Angus Allen, Colchester constituency. I identify as a Conservative. Many years ago, I was chairman of Bristol University Conservatives, and we had to fight very hard against what was then the no platforming ethos. We had speakers like Ray Honeyford come down, and they were forced to take police protection to be able to speak at a university. Now, a lot of the people who were protesting, they were from some of the best schools in the country, allegedly. And now there are High Court judges, they're the head of the civil service, they're in positions of power, and the attitude they had then hasn't changed one bit. So it's very depressing that 35 years later, we're having to refight the same fight. That people, whatever their opinion is, should be allowed to say it without fear or favour.
Thank you. We're now going to number 2, down here in the front.
Okay, well, my name is David George Garavan. I'm from Milton Keynes Central, and when it's about freedom of speech, lots of people say, obviously, when it's about losing your job, but I think it's also beyond that. It's also like, who are you that you're saying this? It also depends sometimes even on your race, sometimes your gender, what you meant to say, because if you're gonna say something more sensitive and you're a certain race or gender, you're gonna be much more penalized than someone which is the other way around. Let's say you're gonna be a white person talking about race, and obviously, you may have some good points. Given you say some sensitive subject, you're much more likely to get cancelled than someone who, let's say, it may be from a different race or color. And so applies to gender and so much more. And this is also something that is unacceptable and has to be changed, these double standards in freedom of speech. Thank you very much.
And now number 3, who's been waiting in the corner. Say your name clearly.
Thank you. Ray Burston from Hales Owen. A few miles from here, in the suburb of Birmingham, is an abortion clinic which gained a certain notoriety over the last few years because Birmingham City Council passed a public space protection order, or rather used a public space protection order, to outlaw, amongst other things, silent prayer. Now, whatever your opinions of the rights and wrongs of abortion, I'm sure all of us in this hall would agree that we've reached a pretty dangerous point when even what people are thinking or praying in their hearts is considered illegal. So my question to Jacob is, when Labour and Liberal Democrat councils were misusing this law to outlaw silent prayer or even silent protest, why did the government not say to them, no, you will not do this, this is not what public space protection orders are intended for? Thank you.
And now we're down to the lady here at number 1. Please introduce yourself.
Fiona Guest from Hemel Hempstead. My father-in-law was a Hungarian Jew who was persecuted by both the Nazis and the communists. He said that this country was no longer the country that he came to, the country that he made his own and which he took citizenship of. Why? Because of the loss of free speech. Britain has become a country in which speakers have the halls that they have booked cancelled. It has become a country in which Jewish people cannot walk freely in their own cities. It has become a country in which the police pursue social media posts that rioters rampage. All this is unnecessary as well as being wrong. Harassment was already illegal. So was inciting violence. So were threatening behaviour and behaviour likely to cause a breach of the peace. I urge the next Conservative government to ditch this concept of hate speech and enforce the existing laws.
We're now going to go to the lady at number 4. Introduce yourself, please.
Yes, hello, my name is Ruth McManus and I'm from Northfield, Birmingham. Just over a year ago, my niece qualified as a midwife and they were told that women giving birth could no longer be referred to as mums and breastfeeding was now chest feeding. Obviously, that's going to please a few people and annoy the majority, and is basically ridiculous because you've got to be a woman to give birth or breastfeed. These changes were written into the NHS, and this is what the nurses were told. And this actually happened, obviously, while the Conservatives were in power. How on earth was this allowed to happen, wasting real important resource for the NHS for absolutely no reason? Oh, by the way, menopause is another one they covered. Thank you.
And now, down at the front, number 2, please.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Zachary Gallagher from the Conservative Association of the City of Leicester. I have a very good friend with whom I will often be found in front of the television set of a weekday evening in Leicester. And the subject of freedom of speech invariably comes up, coincidentally, when we are sitting watching the contributions of Mr. Rees-Mogg as he's warming me up for Patrick Christie's. And my friend contends quite strongly that we don't have freedom of speech in this country, we have freedom of expression. But she's never quite persuaded me as to what the difference is, and I've often pondered, does it mean there are certain things that one cannot say, but one can maybe act out in the manner of the popular parlour game charades, such that one can express them but not say them? And often my imagination has wandered further. If we continue that debate up the M1 towards Scotland, and we cross the border into Scotland, are there certain things that we might say in that vehicle that become illegal in Scotland that would not have been illegal in England, given the difference in law there? If I'd like to respectfully ask Mr. Rees-Mogg in his contribution to reflect and comment on the legal position as regards, do we have freedom of speech in the United Kingdom? Do we have freedom of expression? And are the two interpreted differently within different parts of the United Kingdom? Thank you.
Interesting ideas. Now, number 3, up in the corner, please.
Clive Scowen, Harrow West. I want to raise the specific issue of religious freedom, something that's been the cornerstone of our democracy for certainly a good 200 years, something which has led to, or had led to, an incredibly tolerant country where people could hold a variety of different faiths with mutual respect and with very little difficulty. But now, that freedom to not only to believe, but to act on your beliefs, to, as one of the previous speakers said, even praying is now apparently illegal in certain places, but a freedom also to proclaim what you believe is now very much circumscribed. Time and again, Christian preachers are arrested for saying something unpopular. The same thing, I don't doubt, happens to preachers from other faiths as well. It is in the very nature of religious belief that not everybody's going to agree, and some people are going to be offended. But we must not concede the idea that there is a right not to be offended. There is a right to speak what one believes to be the truth, and others can accept it or not. But we seem to have sleepwalked, it seems to me, almost, into a position where it's really only the popular and the inoffensive which is allowed to be stated in public. Now, I don't know about you, but I would regard any religious faith which was utterly inoffensive as probably not worth very much. Faith, whether it's in Christ, whether it's faith in Islam or Hinduism, carries with it lots of ideas that others don't like. But we have to be free to express them if we are to remain or to become again a truly tolerant country where men and women of whatever belief, or indeed of no faith, and who want to proclaim atheism, are free to do so without fear, and particularly without fear of being arrested. And I do ask that in the thinking about the programme for a future Conservative government, which I trust will be sooner rather than later, that these matters are given full attention.
And now can we have number one? Introduce yourself, please.
Hello, conference. My name is Tommy Sebastian, a member from Chelmsford branch. I'm just reflecting, we need a fine line between freedom of speech and human right. And we have many examples. The high-profile case, how many years we struggled to expel somebody. I don't know whether I can mention the name, I'm not scared. Anjan Chowdhury. And the previous speaker said, religion is part of a multicultural society. So where is the fine line? We can say, enough is enough. This is not British value. How much money, public money, we spent to run the case against that person, including the previous Home Minister and previous Prime Minister. So conference must think the fine line, while we respect, we are a tolerant country, but we must say enough is enough. Thank you.
You're doing really well for time. I'm glad we can get through so many people. Now, can we have number four, the lady at number four?
Jill from London. This is a question about the role of the police in allowing people to have free speech. I went to a political meeting, well, it was actually in a restaurant, and a very senior member of the Conservative Party was attempting to speak to people, 40, 50 people in a restaurant. However, we couldn't hear because the people outside who were being presumably controlled by the police were exercising their right to freedom of speech, and they wanted to let us know what their views were to freeing Palestine. Actually, the meeting was nothing to do with that whatsoever, but unfortunately, we couldn't hear the speaker.
Thank you. Now, can we go down to number two here?
Thank you. My name is Edward Howard. I'm from the Hartford and Stortford branch. The great American writer H.L. Mencken once said, "The trouble about fighting for human freedom is that you have to spend much of your life defending scoundrels." That's the more mild term, admittedly. For oppressive laws are always aimed at them originally, and oppression must be stopped in the beginning if it is to be stopped at all. And my attitude in regards to this with freedom of speech is that there have been several high-profile cases over the last year or so which show that protecting freedom of speech must start with even like very fringe actors who we may not like, and I certainly don't. So when you have people, for instance, like say Sam Mealer, for instance, who's currently in prison for sickering, admittedly not a very particularly good individual, it must be said, but at the same time, you know, he should have his right to freedom of speech defended as well. Or someone like James Allchurch, a man currently in jail for 4 years as well for, admittedly, again, discussing things on the radio, but no, as far as I'm aware, incitement to violence, which would warrant that sort of thing. And the final thing I wanted to bring up was, admittedly, an American case, but involves a Briton, the great Peter Brimelow and his wife Lydia, Vida being strangled by, his organisation rather, being strangled by American lawfare, which, if we're not careful about, could come over here at some point, especially under a Starmer government. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Now can we have number three in the top right-hand corner?
Thank you. Jack Barr, I work in Honiton and Sidmouth. We lost that seat to the Lib Dems next time, but I know with the strong Conservative party platform in 5 years we can win it back, just like your own seat, I'm sure, Jacob. So, my family come from rural East Devon, and I know the importance of embedding yourself into the community. So when I came up to Birmingham for this conference, the first time I properly visited Birmingham, I said I needed to get into the community as well. So we went and watched a game with some friends at Birmingham City before the conference started. And on the bus journey over, I met a fascinating man. And he was talking to me about his life experience. He was asking what I did, and I said I studied politics at uni and I wanted to go and change the country for the better. He said, fat chance of doing that. He said, all politicians are corrupt. Do you know, this is a prevailing view that so many people have in politics today. Because we have a political establishment that has controlled the media and changed the minds of people to believe that we're never going to tackle the issues that real people want. And that starts with free speech. Because not only can people not feel that the politicians listen to them anymore, they feel they can't even voice their discontent towards that. They feel that this consensus has broken out that tells you what to think, not how to think. And that is what we must stand for as Conservatives, and that is what we must change. That begins at university. I went to Exeter University. I set up my own free speech university debating society, and I know firsthand, because I was put through multiple investigations by the university, how difficult it is to stand for free speech. The administrations themselves try their best to stop that happening. And that is part of the reason why so many young Conservatives don't feel able to speak their mind. Somebody made a point in a previous speech that the process of protest has gone too far. I don't think it's protest when you're not trying to have your view, but you're trying to shut somebody else's view down. That's control. That's wrong. Members, we should never stand for stopping other people's free speech, even if we feel passionate about something. So we've got to oppose that. We've got to make sure that we are allowing these people to have these conversations. This man I met on the bus didn't think he was allowed a view because he thought he would be labelled far right. And we know why that is, because this new Labour government is labelling everything they don't agree with as far right. The overuse of these terms, we've heard them all, racist, misogynistic. These are important terms to call out inappropriate behaviour. And Rosie Duffield's been labelling some of those terms at Keir Starmer in the last couple of days, I see. But we all know that when these terms are overused, they are just used by the political left to silence voices they don't agree. So I say to members, if you know you're right, if you know you're standing for something you believe in, don't feel ashamed if you get labelled with things. I've been labelled everything under the sun. Embrace the fact that you're challenging that consensus, you're taking the fight forward, and you can be part of a free speech Conservative vision to change the world for good. Thank you.
Now we have time for just one more question before we hand over to Sir Jacob. So can the last question come forward, and do be quite concise. Thank you.
Hello, conference. My name is Leo and I'm from North East Somerset, so that's Jacob's former constituency. Right. Always our MP in our hearts. So, in my generation, there is a growing stigma for being a heterosexual white male. And I am often told by left-leaning peers at school that I cannot speak on issues concerning race, sexuality, and gender. How can we, as a party, address this issue? Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like now to ask Jacob to have a roundup on all your ideas and to put some in himself. Please, Jacob.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. What an absolutely fascinating series of contributions that we've had. And let me try and answer some of them, agree with many of them. The speaker who said, we have the right to offend, quoted Voltaire. That is obviously true. We should defend the right of Angela Rayner to call us scum, shouldn't we? That's what she wants to do. It's no skin off my nose. Also, she may be a very helpful secret weapon for us. I think people who do all these property transactions are quite Tory anyway. It's much more a Tory than a socialist activity. Now, Angus, who identified as a Conservative, may I join with him and identify as a Conservative too? Probably actually a Tory, but then I'm old-fashioned, as you may have noticed. But Angus made this point about universities in Bristol. I went to speak at Bristol University, and there was security and police and all this sort of stuff. And then BUCA, the Bristol University Conservative Association, got a bill for £600. That is not freedom of speech. Freedom of speech has to be free of cost as well as being free in what you say. That the state must bear that cost, not poor, hard-done-by Conservative students or lefty students. But I also spoke at Cardiff and had a huge array of Palestinian people protesting against me. They were entitled to do so. They weren't threatening violence, but they were entitled to be there and say they didn't agree with me. Ray mentioned abortion clinics. I mean, silent prayer, that's freedom of thought. Not even freedom of speech. Of course we should have freedom of thought. Fiona mentioned law and order, and we want the police to enforce things properly. Ruth made the fundamental point about language. We've bought in to the language of equality. Now, I hope our distinguished chairman is a chairman, not a chair. The chair was what I was sitting on. Do you want my very brief lecture? My very brief lecture on the word man. If you go back to the Anglo-Saxon, there were were men and woe men. The man bit means people. And where is the last remaining vestige of the word were? Werewolf. They're always male, I'm sorry to tell the gentlemen in this audience. If there were woe-wolves, they would be female, but they never seem to come into fashion. Man is the people bit of it, were and woe. So if you want to be politically correct, bring back the were bit and call us weremen. Were chairman? Anyway, it'll get very confusing. But don't give in to the lefty use of language. It is absolutely fundamental. Clive mentioned freedom of religion, which made me think of John Locke. John Locke, good Somerset man, as all good people from Somerset are, anyway, said that you should have freedom of religion, but that didn't allow you to break the law. What he meant by that was if your religion was in favor of human sacrifice, you weren't allowed to have human sacrifice because that broke the law. But you were allowed to believe that human sacrifice was a good thing. He made one exception. He said you couldn't have freedom of religion for papists because we're too dangerous. I think, don't applaud that, sir. I'm going to take offence at that, but I hope we will broaden him out and have freedom for papists like me. And I'll just come finally to Leo. There were so many other good points, but I do want to make some concluding remarks as well. Leo, just as you've shown today, be bold. Stand up and express your opinion. Ignore what the left say. But why does freedom of speech matter? Where has it come from? Well, let's go back to the House of Commons on the 8th of February, 1576. Now, I don't know if many of you were there. I was lounging on the back benches, just keeping an eye on things, when Sir Peter Wentworth got up to speak. And Sir Peter Wentworth is important because he is the first example of the claim of free speech in Parliament. What did he say? He said, "None is without fault, no, not our gracious Queen." And so horrified were the assembled members of Parliament at that they voted to lock him up in the Tower of London. But freedom of speech is something we have claimed as a right for hundreds of years. We formalise it in a parliamentary sense in 1689 in the Bill of Rights. There is absolute freedom of speech in Parliament, both the Lords and the Commons, and the courts cannot overrule it. And why is this important? Well, freedom of speech is at the heart of our Constitution. There are four great pillars of our Constitution, and what are they? They are freedom of speech, democracy, the rule of law, and rights of property. And if you take one of those pillars away, our Constitution collapses. How do you have democracy without freedom of speech? How do you run an election if we can't print leaflets saying that the other side are a bunch of rotters, or words to that effect? How do you print leaflets saying that the Lib Dems are good, honest people if you don't have freedom of speech? I mean, even with freedom of speech, that's pushing it, but nonetheless. Your democracy cannot take place without freedom of speech. You cannot have an effective election because all you get is the message approved by the government and churned out by the BBC. Wouldn't necessarily be very helpful to us. But why does the rule of law depend on freedom of speech? What do those two have in common? Well, again, the law must be in the open. And we've had increasing instances of private justice where scandals don't get revealed. And what if judges are corrupt? We certainly had corrupt judges in the 16th and 17th century. How did we expose that? Freedom of speech. That if you aren't able to say that the judge is taking a backhander, how do you make sure your judges are honest? Or how do you say that the judge has got it wrong? May I just quote my own father, who breaks a butterfly upon a wheel. That was using free speech to challenge an error by a judge, which the judges have never really liked. And indeed, historically, we had laws against it that made it very hard to criticize judges. So freedom of speech protects the rule of law. And what about rights of property? Well, with rights of property, What happens when a socialist government comes along and decides to use a compulsory purchase order, or dare I say a Tory government, because we weren't much better, to take your freeholding, your little bit of land, the house you've lived in and that your family has lived in for generations? You need to be able to say this is being done because they've got some interest in it, or this is being done and they haven't followed the law properly. Your rights of property depend upon your freedom of speech. And freedom of speech is under attack to the peril of our Constitution. Who has read recently about Mr. Fayed, the former late owner of Harrods? Why did you not read a word about him whilst he was still alive in this context? Because we have libel laws and increasing privacy laws that make it harder to reveal things. And yes, the online safety bill has made it possible for Ofcom to have regulations that will curtail our freedom of speech. What happened when The Sun, that great newspaper that in the 80s and 90s exposed scandal after scandal, revealed the news about Hugh Edwards? The left came out and said it was shameful and he'd done nothing wrong and they were ruining a good man. Freedom of speech is under attack. And what about that great spider at the centre of the funding of the Labour Party, my Lord Alley? What is the one thing he's spoken about in the House of Lords? Curtailing freedom of speech and controlling the press. What did that dreadful Leveson report try to do? I was one of 13 MPs who voted against it, 530 in favour. When the House of Commons is united, it is almost invariably wrong. Freedom of speech, oh, just look back over the history. Freedom of speech is under attack. You, ladies and gentlemen, you are the troops who are here to defend it. We are the Conservatives who will defend it. We will defend Angela calling us scum, but we will defend our Constitution. Because without freedom of speech, the other pillars collapse. There is no democracy, no rule of law, no rights of property. And the Labour Party hates freedom of speech because socialism is always exposed by truth. Fortunately, great is truth, and it will prevail.
Thank you very much for those really interesting contributions on protecting freedom of speech. And thank you very much to Sir Jacob for telling us his views and feeding in, perhaps as one of the greatest orators of his generation, on his views. Thank you very much.
For our next member debate on building homes and protecting green spaces, please welcome John Belsey and David Simmons.
Well, good morning, conference. I'm delighted to introduce the debate topic of building homes and protecting green spaces, and I look forward to your contributions. Although I'm just facilitating the debate, I should say I've got particular interest as a local councillor myself and a former cabinet member for green spaces. And in my own ward in Sussex, I live very close to the Ashdown Forest, where, of course, Winnie the Pooh lives. So we're always under pressure not to concrete over Winnie the Pooh. So I look very much forward to your contributions. Very delighted to be joined today by David Simmons, who's the MP for Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner, and Shadow Minister for Housing, Communities and Local Government. Do you have any initial comments, David, you'd like to say?
Thank you very much for the introduction. I started out my political career in the last century as chair of a planning committee, and here I am as the Shadow Minister on Housing and Planning. It's something we all know is very important. If you can't become a homeowner in particular, how are you going to have a stake in our capitalist society? And I'm really looking forward to this opportunity to learn, reflect, to hear people's ideas, so that we have a compelling offer for the voters at the next general election.
Thank you, David. So we've got a couple of contributions submitted in advance. We have Jessica Stewart from Reigate and Marion Gilpin from Thornbury and Yate. Once we've heard from Jessica and Marion and their contributions, we will be opening it up to the floor as we have with the other debates. So there will be the opportunity to stand by those numbered microphones and to make your contributions that way. So thank you. We will move straight on with the contributions. So if I could ask Jessica Stewart to come and make her 3 minutes, please. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. Good homes mean good lives. With a safe and secure home, everyone has a better chance of getting on, getting a good education, a good job, enjoying better health, and having a positive stake in society. If the Conservatives want to capture the next generation of voters, we need to once again become the party of home ownership. We know there's an urgent need for more homes. So why does the house building industry have such a bad image problem? And why are developers always cast as villains within our society? My view, based on 26 years in the planning industry and 12 years of running my own company, is that people are fearful of change and a very complicated system. Property ownership is vital for our democracy and economy. We want to give young people hope that they will one day own their own home. It will be hard and they will have to strive every day, but it is an achievable goal. To do this, the Conservatives will need everyone at every level of the party to work together. Firstly, by consulting the people, through a countrywide consultation about development, and only then will we start to move the NIMBY dial. People are worried about their way of life and house prices, and we need to reassure them that with good development, those won't be affected in the long term. By creating honesty and trust and driving up developer standards, they want to invest in our communities to build, but social and affordable percentages are making it almost impossible to find a viable way of doing that. By selling more properties, they will deliver economic growth, jobs, and better homes. And by changing the culture of how we talk about house building, campaigning against new homes in local elections should not be seen as an easy vote winner. It smacks of the haves holding back the have-nots. But where should these homes go? Of course, it makes sense to build up in already developed areas, but there is going to be a need to develop in rural areas too, for the next generation. We need to be brave and accept that some green fields will be lost by building close to existing communities. But more private housing means more money going into supporting infrastructure. That's doctors, schools and roads. The Conservative vote will only recover if councils give more planning permissions and if more private homes can be bought at a fair price where people want to live. We must build homes to rebuild the Conservative vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you for that strong start on this debate. I'd like to call up Marion Gilpin, please. Thank you.
Good morning, conference. My name is Marion, and I am from Yate, which is in the west of England. It's just a little bit north of Bristol. I'd just like to share with you this morning a few thoughts on the preservation of the green belt. It's a very narrow subject, but it's a subject which affects a lot of our cities where there is a green belt in place. There are 14 of them, in fact, in England, surrounding our major cities, and the aim of them is to prevent uncontrolled spread of housing and industrial development into the countryside. They were put in place around the middle of the 20th century, and to many of us, they are a brilliant concept and should be preserved at all costs. At the time they were invented, which is not that long ago, they were just deemed to be a good idea. But now there are even more pressing reasons why we should continue to preserve these green areas. We worry about climate change, and we should. We hear a lot about nature conservation, and we need to. The fact that many species of plants and insects are under threat of dying out completely, the small creatures are being driven from their natural habitats by the indiscriminate swallowing up and building over of their natural habitats. But there is another vitally important issue about which we've heard a lot in recent years, and it is the state of the nation's mental health. Many in our population, especially in cities, are living quite stressful lives, trying to juggle family life, managing more than one job, looking after the needs of young children and of taking on responsibility for elderly relatives, disabled relatives, mentally challenging family members, and there is the ever-present stress of the constant and creeping increases in the cost of living. One of the greatest boosts to positive mental health is to get out and away from the city and the dirt and the dust and the traffic and the noise and take a walk in the countryside. The green belts around our cities provide an easily accessible area of countryside for just such recreation and are as vital as parks and public gardens inside our cities. Having said all that, there is absolutely no doubt that we need more housing. Obviously we do. With our rapidly expanding population, housing and industrial areas need space to expand, and the very obvious answer is to develop brownfield sites within our urban areas. The good news is that there are more of these than we think, but the bad news is that they are not coming on stream quickly enough. There are now defunct department stores. There are vacant shops on our high streets which could be converted into homes. There are redundant office blocks now, ripe for conversion because so many people now work from home.
If you wouldn't mind starting to wrap up, that would be great. Thank you.
So my message to you, conference, today is that we should preserve the green belts at all costs and look to make housing more easily accessible within existing city boundaries, and after that, look outside the green belt and maybe build new towns and villages. Thank you.
Thank you for those submitted questions. I'm going to go to the lady at microphone number 1 very shortly. If anybody else wants to make a contribution, please feel free to go to the numbered microphones, as I can see some people already are, and we will come to you in turn. David, do you have any initial comments you wish to make before we go?
Some really important areas of focus, but I really want to hear from those who have joined the conference today.
Thank you, David. So if it's all right, if you just introduce yourself with your name and maybe your constituency, and then get on with your questions. So the lady at microphone number 1, please.
My name is Lynn Faulkner. I'm from Mid-Bedfordshire, and I was one of the speakers, but I got held up this morning and arrived too late to be put on the list. Good morning, conference. I am a lifelong Conservative and was a Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire councillor, but I did not attend conference for years as I was disillusioned with declining standards of conduct at Westminster. Many Conservative MPs did not observe the Nolan principles of public life. So we lost public trust and the July election. The UK has a growing population, rising to 78 million by 2050, when we will have Europe's largest population. as Germany's population is falling due to a low birth rate. Our government did not achieve its annual 300,000 house target due to outdated planning rules and NIMBYism. France and the UK both have a population of 67 million, but France now has 37 million homes, while the UK only has 30 million. People want to live in communities with schools, shops, buses. Letchworth Garden City was the world's first garden city, built in the 19th century and much admired. Milton Keynes was carefully planned and developed over 20 years. Today, it is a thriving green city with 270,000 people. Bedfordshire is a rural county with thousands of new homes, mainly urban sprawl with no infrastructure. I live in Wixham's, a development of 10,000 houses started in 2000, which still lacks the GP surgery promised 22 years ago. The Luton NHS Commissioning Board has refused to finance our GP surgery, although, wait for it, it has an annual income of £1.3 billion. Labour plans to build 1.5 million houses and has told Bedfordshire to build thousands more houses on Green Belt. However, the government has set no housing target for London, where housing demand is huge. Houses must be built on brownfield sites in cities with community facilities. We need starter homes for young people and smaller homes for pensioners, not 5-bedroom luxury houses. Above all,
yes.
We must preserve our green belt for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure many of those points resonate with people in the room. Thank you for that contribution, Lynn. I'm very pleased to see a very familiar and very wise face at microphone number 2. So, Daphne, if you'd like to make your contribution, please.
Yes, I am Daphne Bagshaw, and I am the chairman of Sussex Weald, John's Neck of the Woods, so I've got to be careful. I do not believe this party should be looking to see which policies do we need to attract this group of people or that group of people. I think we should be pursuing the policies that we think are right and ethical. And we should put those policies before the public and hope they will vote for them. Now, in my part of the world, and I'm not just talking about Conservatives, the very beautiful place where I live, people are very good at saying one thing, and that one thing is no. They say no to more or less everything, to more or less any proposal that comes up for building. They make our councillors' life a misery. They've made our MPs' life very difficult. And yet, we do have to be prepared to share. And we have to be prepared to share not just the brownfields, but some of the beauty that people wish to experience for themselves. The beauty that, in fact, we have. And when we talk about protecting the green belt for future generations, we often mean for future generations of our own family. But we actually have to be prepared to see young people move into the areas where we live, enjoy that as we do, with small houses that they can afford. Our average supporter is now age 64. Can you wonder at it? I'm still running a constituency and I'm 78, and you can wonder at that as well.
Thank you, Daphne. Thanks for the contributions so far. If we can keep them as short as possible, then it will allow as many of you as possible to be able to make your views heard. So if I go back to the lady at microphone number 1, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I was supposed to be speaking up on the stage. I've been told to come down here. So good morning, conference. I'm leader of the opposition at Cheshire East Borough Council that has a local plan and an 11-year housing supply. But under Labour's MPPF proposals, our annual housing numbers are expected to leap by 125% from just under 1,000 homes a year to over 2,500. Our green belt protects us from Manchester coalescence, but is at risk of grey belt redesignation, and under proposed new cross-boundary concessions may be snatched by Andy Burnham if Manchester literally cannot get its own houses in order. If passed, these scenarios will be replicated across the country. Local planning authorities are not perfect, but are better placed to plan for local housing need than top-down central government diktat. Government must incentivise brownfield first, and local planning authorities must not be held to ransom by planning and appeals processes that encourage speculative, unplanned development on greenfield sites that fail to meet local objectives and where sustainability is too often sacrificed under the claims of non-viability. New homes must be sustainable in the most fundamental sense. They must offer sustainable transport links, schools, shops and medical facilities as an integral part of a cohesive area plan. Currently, developers and utility companies are not required to provide evidence at outline planning stage that essential utilities are even deliverable. This has significant detrimental impacts on developments and surrounding communities where there are existing shortfalls in the utilities infrastructure. We do need more homes, and policy must reflect our priorities, enabling young people to get onto the housing ladder, older people to downsize within their own communities, the provision of more social rented homes, and homes that are designed to meet the needs of older people and those with disabilities, so they can live in their own homes for longer. Too often planning policy is beholden to the profit-driven imperative of the big developers and their shareholders. Labour's radical housing targets will inevitably threaten precious greenbelt and greenfield sites that act as the green lungs in our urban-rural hinterlands. Grey belt definitions may be helpful, but they're ambiguous and vulnerable to further greenbelt development by the back door. Increasing numbers and density of housing come at an unacceptable cost. If the pandemic taught us nothing else, it was the importance of a decent-sized garden, access to green space, be it parks or sports fields, and access to the wider countryside. These are pivotal to population health and impact both physical and mental well-being. The social and financial costs, if we ignore these, are immense. In summary, we must build the right homes in the right places that meet the needs of residents and grow sustainable urban and rural communities. If Conservative policy development adheres to these premises, we will be heading in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, and it's clear there are some common themes starting to emerge from the contributions. We've got a lot of speakers. If you could try and keep them to less than a minute, that would be really helpful. We haven't had any, I'll go to number 2 in a minute, but we haven't had any from number 4 yet, so if the person at microphone 4 would like to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. My name is Tony Freeman. I was also meant to be on the stage speaking, but I had a terribly difficult time getting in because of my restricted mobility, so apologies for being late. I live in Fleet in Hampshire, a seat we lost at the last general election. I moved there 22 years ago because it's a very nice place to live, and in that time that I've lived there, we've seen numerous large new housing developments bolted onto the edge of town. I have never objected to any of them, but what I don't like is the lack of infrastructure provision associated with that population growth. For example, I don't think we've had a single new GP surgery built in the local area since I moved there 22 years ago. What I would like to talk about is new towns. We desperately need more housing. Good housing is good for growth, and I think our agenda should all be about growth. It hasn't been about growth in the past, and we should use the time of opposition, which, let's face it, may be up to 5 years, it may be even longer, to develop some new policies that are attractive to younger people and take a strategic approach to fundamental problems that we have in the economy. And one of those biggest problems is the lack of affordable new housing for younger people. So I don't think incremental bolt-on housing development, identikit little boxes with tiny gardens, inadequate parking, etc., is the solution. And there probably isn't enough brownfield sites to accommodate all the new housing that's required. So, should we have a debate about new towns? I think we should. If you want an example, one of the previous speakers already mentioned it, Milton Keynes. I have family members living in Milton Keynes. It has a bit of a reputational issue, and it may not be very atmospheric, but boy does it work. It really does work. It's wildly popular, people want to move there, and businesses thrive there. It's a real success story. So why don't we do more of it? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will be going round. The gentleman at microphone number 3 has been waiting very patiently, so please make your contribution.
Hello, Andrew, Preston Conservatives. Most of society would either be completely neutrally affected or benefit from a drop in house prices. What will it take for those in charge of planning, in the Treasury, and in the media to actually treat houses like every other essential, such as food? When the price goes up, it's treated as inflation, it's treated as a bad thing. Homes aren't an asset, they are a necessity to live a comfortable life. They need to be accessible. And besides, even if you are on the property ladder, if you want to upgrade because your family's got bigger, the disparity between the properties is smaller if house prices are low. So how do we fix the incentives to view it as a good thing? And besides, there might be some votes in it because we're about to hit an inflection point where more people currently rent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go to microphone number 2, and then we'll go to microphone number 1.
Chris Bowman here, Tunbridge Wells. We need more homes, particularly for young people. Owning a home gives you a feeling of being a stakeholder in society. We face difficult decisions. In some areas, we've got to nibble into the green belt. In other areas, we've got enough brownfield sites. The people who can decide this best are local authorities. We should devolve down to them. What happens at the moment is you've got local debate and no decision is made. It's bad to nibble into the green belt. It's bad not to develop brownfield sites. What is ridiculous, if you've got a choice, is not to make any decision at all. We had Michael Gove, I think it was, who put local housing targets. As Conservatives, we wimped out and we took away those targets. This was a sign of weak government, listening to local MPs rather than doing what the nation wanted. I do hope this is going to change.
Thank you. And it's clear many of these contributions are resonating very well within the room, so I'm sure David will be picking up on that. Microphone number 1, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Sarul Marwa from Solihull West and Shirley. I sit on the planning committee. When I heard the Labour's statement, 1.5 million homes, one of the gentlemen in the press said, what a foolish promise. While protecting the green spaces, it sounds like a win-win situation. But when we dig deeper, this policy is for problematic, then it first appears. Let me point out that the developers do not deliver service according to how much Britain needs it. They do it for profit. Labour claims it can balance large-scale housing development with the protection of green belt areas. But let's be honest, you can't build that many homes without encroaching onto the green spaces. The moment you open the door, the development or the green belt land, it's a dangerous precedent. Once these areas goes, they are gone forever. Green spaces aren't just nice to have. They are essential to combating climate change, preserving biodiversity, and improving the mental and physical health of communities. Labour says their development won't harm keen Grantmill sites. But where will they build? The reality is that large scale of development always leads to pressure on protected land. We cannot afford to lose any more of these spaces. They are lungs of our cities, provided clean air, reducing pollution, and offering a respite for urban sprawl. Solihull is the green belt between Birmingham and Coventry. Without it, the whole point of the Greenbelt, reducing coal sense, will risk being lost. Making Greenbelt give way to housing need is deeply dangerous. When do you stop giving up Greenbelt or countryside? And there's a crux of the problem. What happens when we start sacrificing Greenbelt land? Does anyone really believe that the developers will stop there? The policy could open the floodgates for unchecked expansion. Now let's talk about the infrastructure.
We've only got time for a couple more. Is it possible you could just wrap up?
Okay. Let's not rush into decisions. Could harm our environment, outburden our infrastructure, and fail the communities they're meant to serve. We need more sustainable, thoughtful approach. We don't want Labour to concrete our green belt. Conservatives are now alone and the only party who wants to protect the green belt. Thank you.
Thank you. So I've only got 2 questions left, so with apologies to everybody else, I'll take the gentleman in the cream jacket, number 2, and then somebody from microphone number 4.
Thank you, Chair. Geoffrey Eclair Heath. I lived in Tunbridge for a long time, currently living in Worcestershire. Where communities are subjected to housing development disproportionate to the local need, it's not surprising there is objection, resentment and mistrust. Large-scale housing developments, by and large, do not bring benefits to the existing population. They increase traffic, they use scarce resources such as doctors, increase the load on water and drainage without sufficient financial compensation to develop those resources in proportion. So where they are proposed, these developments will be resisted by everyone, by every means. Developers complain the planning system inhibits house building. It does so because so many large developments have a totally negative impact on people who already live nearby. People have invested all over the place in their efforts into neighbourhood plans to protect their localities. They're enormously detailed documents covering where development can be envisaged, and it should be, the protection of the key spaces, and the architectural styles to retain cohesion among buildings. The plans go through an approval process by a local plebiscite and then by the Secretary of State. One might think that therefore developments would be controlled according to the plan. Enter the planning officer. Largely in secret, planning officers so often find reasons not to follow policy laboriously drafted by communities, and permission is either recommended or even granted under delegated powers for developments which do not comply. To undo such a permission is ruinously expensive for the community, and the result is a mistrust in planning. Developers complain about the time taken over getting permission. A part of the answer is to create trust. Planners must be put in a position of working for the people who pay them, the local community. One planner working for my authority actually has a consultancy business on the side, in addition, boasting of exploiting planning loopholes. We need to have trust.
We are going to ask you to wrap up if that's possible.
About to, sir. Trust must be put into the process, and the reward will be an easier passage for the building of more homes.
Thank you very much. And final contribution from the gentleman at number 4.
Hello, Jeremy Maddox. I'm from Chelsea, Fulham and Kensington Conservative Association. Ladies and gentlemen, when politicians say we're going to build more homes, it's never the politicians who are actually building the homes, is it? There are only 2 ways that politicians can actually build homes. One is to borrow more money or tax people more to make public housing, or to encourage the private sector to build more houses. I'm a private landlord. In most sectors, that makes me more hated than politicians, I think, in some of the press. But actually, it's private landlords that were invigorated by Margaret Thatcher. Back when she came into power, she created the assured short-hold tenancy system, which allowed them to prosper and develop and create houses for lots and lots of people. When I first started, and it's over 30 years ago, it was difficult to find people. We were clamoring, trying to get more and more people to come and view the properties, and you had to make sure that the properties were in perfect condition, because otherwise there was plenty of choice. They could go somewhere else. There was a lot of housing. And the housing market grew and expanded under those reforms. Right now, because of all of the tax changes, all of the regulatory changes, and everything else, builders do not want to build houses for landlords anymore. Landlords are leaving the market. Right now, getting people into a property, sometimes I have 15 people wanting to take a property because landlords have left the market. It is in crisis at the moment, and that is not because governments aren't interfering to make more regulations. It's because government is making regulations that the whole system has collapsed. What we need to do is get rid of the regulations, get rid of the regulations on building, get rid of all these ridiculous requirements on builders to produce unprofitable social housing, etc., etc., and make sure that builders can get on and do the job and build the houses that this country needs. And we need a new affordable, short hold, assured tenancy commitment by the next Conservative government, so that we can get rid of the regulations and we can get more landlords and get more property and get more building and get more things happening. I'm going to keep this short because there's a very young lady from the Young Conservatives who wants to say a few words over there. Please. Thank you.
All right, just keep it very short because we are overrunning now, and we want to hear from David in terms of his response. So please keep it very short.
Yeah, no worries. Good morning, conference. My name is Alice Barner, and I'm a Bracknell constituency Young Conservative. In my local area, there have been 3 new building developments. And in order for these developments to build, so much of our countryside has been wiped out. Whilst we need more housing, how can we protect our precious wildlife such as badgers, hedgehogs and birds without wrecking our beautiful countryside that we've got so little of, especially around my area?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody, for your contributions. Sorry if you were hoping to make a contribution and we haven't had time to hear it, but I think we've had a wide range of questions, and I'm going to invite David, if you would, to provide some response on behalf of our shadow government.
Well, thank you very much indeed, John. Anybody who is watching this debate on television would be struck by the fact that the Conservative Party clearly gets the importance of housing and planning in this country. And in a debate that's ranged from Cheshire to Chelsea, that's gone to Tunbridge, to Sussex, to mid-Bedfordshire, we've had a range of views that both champion the need for development, that recognise the complex economics of our housing market, that share the experience people have as local councillors and campaigners in the planning system, and the frustration that those who aspire to own a home share, alongside the frustration of those who want to preserve the nature of the place that they live in and that they cherish. One of the opportunities in opposition is that, as well as being the shadow minister, which means I don't have direct decision-making powers, I'm also the interim shadow minister, whilst we get ourselves a new leader as a party. And each of those candidates has the opportunity to reflect on the place that housing and planning will have in building the electoral coalition that takes the Conservative Party to power. And I hope all those candidates are listening to the views that have been expressed, that we need a planning policy that brings forward a greater degree of intergenerational fairness and recognises, whether we like it or not, that the change in demographics with a much higher proportion of renters in our country means that the needs and expectations of the population in housing terms will be different from what they have been in the past. We need to recognise the huge regional disparity in our housing market. That we've just seen a Labour government reducing housing targets in London and Birmingham and Coventry, and massively increasing housing targets in places like Solihull, which both logistically and practically makes little sense, but also doesn't address the fundamental question for those people resident in those areas of, am I going to be able to afford to buy or rent a home in a place that reflects the economic development of my local area? And we're having this debate at a time when there are around 1.4 million new homes with planning permission in England already. So we delivered 1 million homes in the duration of the last Parliament, and our local authorities, under huge pressure from central government, have issued planning permission for 1.4 million homes already. And the big question for me that I will put to Angela Rayner and to others in government is why it should be a priority to remove greenbelt protections rather than ensure that those 1.4 million homes are built. So just briefly before we conclude, it seems that there are elements of what's come forward in the debate today and that are out there in other countries that are sharing similar challenges that give us a hint of what we as a party might put forward as that electorally popular proposition. Firstly, we need to look a great deal at the nature of our housing supply, not just the numbers of units. I know as a London Fringe Member of Parliament that there's always the temptation to build up lots and lots of studio apartments, each of which counts as a new unit of housing. But what communities are looking for is family homes, retirement homes to enable people who want to downsize but stay in their local community to find the kind of housing supply that they need. And a greater supply of things like homework units to reflect a shift towards different patterns of employment and economic activity. So not just units, not just how many we build, but also what we build, so that under-occupied units and inadequately developed units can be brought forward. The role of the planning inspector and the planning system. And we know there are many sites around the country where local authorities are hugely frustrated that a developer gets consent of some kind from a local authority, appeals to the planning inspector, then goes to the Secretary of State and starts the process again. So despite proactive decision-making by a council, homes do not actually get delivered. And new incentives to developers to ensure that those consents are built out quickly is going to be critical. And recognising that those of us who are now at Westminster, I'm one of those fortunate to have been re-elected, cannot say at Westminster that we need new homes and then campaign against every planning application in our constituency. We need to champion the right solution, the right kinds of homes for the communities that we represent. And just as Conservative councils have done a fantastic job of doing that, we have the opportunity to ensure we continue to take that message, that we are the party of the right types of homes in the right places for the needs of our country in the future.
Thank you very much, David. We've run out of time, so this concludes our debate. Thank you very much for your contributions, and we will be back for the last member debate very shortly on building our economy. Thank you.
For our final member debate on growing the economy, please welcome Stuart Harper and Laura Trott.
Well, good morning, conference. It's my pleasure to introduce and chair the fourth of our member debates this morning. Now, we all know that building a strong economy is an essential Conservative principle. But unlike Keir Starmer's Labour government, we also know that the growth needs to be in all parts of the economy, not just in the niche sectors of luxury opticians or hospitality of North London football grounds. So I'm looking forward to hearing member contributions this morning on how we can build a strong economy. Each of our speakers from the stage will have 3 minutes, and I would ask them to keep to time. And then I hope we can have time to open to the floor. I'm also delighted to welcome Laura Trott, MP for Sevenoaks and Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, who will be responding to the debate. So without further ado, I'd like to call on our first speaker, Melissa Hussain, to come to the stage, after which I'll call Matthew Cole, Steve Smith and Jonathan Hall. So Melissa, if you'd like to come forward.
Conference, it is an honour to stand before you today as the first speaker on the debate about growing the economy. This is a special moment in our party's history. We are choosing a new leader to represent us. We are the party of capitalism. It is business, not bureaucracy, that creates jobs, wealth, and opportunity. But we need to talk about growing the economy also as a means of protecting our citizens from poverty. If the economy succeeds, we have greater means to protect our citizens from crime, abuse, trauma, and the types of social ills we too often see in impoverished communities. Currently, conservatives are not selling capitalism this way. Instead, we enable lying labor to argue that capitalism destroys poorer communities. If we want to grow the economy, we must do so in a way that upholds the dignity of our impoverished citizens. I knew a boy whose parents were drug dealers, but his parents are not caught in good time, so the boy grows up with drugs in the house. The child is put into the care system when his parents are caught. When he is 18, the support he has received suddenly disappears. The boy, now a man, is again traumatized by homelessness. A council in East London gives a home to a woman whose parents beat and traumatized her because they were narcissistic. When she became an adult, she continues to date a guy who beats her up. She wants to have children and goes on benefits pretending to be a single mother, but she does not pass the child benefits on to her children. She feels no obligation to adequately care for anyone because of how her parents treated her when she was a child. These stories are real, and they happen in communities like the one I'm from in East London. However, there was a girl who ran an experiment. She was so desperate to escape the cycle of poverty that she does everything she possibly can to escape. She works so hard that she becomes sick and requires urgent medical attention. But fortunately, she was able to escape poverty on time. She was without permanent damage to her health. She was successful by denying the pessimism, destroying the people she loves. Conference, let's not make the child suffering from poverty wait anymore. I founded Anti-Poverty Conservatives. Please find us online and join as a supporter for free. Join our team if you're interested. Next time, when we are responsible for growing the economy, our party will have a team dedicated to uniting the rich and poor of our country under the Conservative banner, where we are starry-eyed with hope about our future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melissa. I now call on Matthew Cole from Exeter.
The professor of economics, Paul Krugman, once said that productivity isn't everything, but in the long run, it is almost everything. It is therefore a bit of a disaster that the UK productivity growth has been pretty much flat since 2008, and a long time before that has been a problem. It used to be called, in fact, in academic circles, the productivity puzzle. But after much research, there isn't much of a puzzle to be found. Essentially, in the United Kingdom, businesses invest far less than our G7 competitors. In fact, we're near the bottom of the OECD for business investment. Since investment spurs productivity growth, it's not really a surprise that we've been doing so badly. The question that really needs to be answered is why? So the answer, I would say, refers to a relatively obscure area of law, and perhaps that's why people don't really seem to identify the problem. The problem is actually to do with takeovers. You see, if you are a British company, you cannot block a takeover from occurring. This is making our companies almost uniquely exposed to hostile takeovers. Okay, so I can see what you're thinking. Why on earth would that affect business investment? Well, when takeovers usually occur, the board often gets fired and replaced. And since there's no legal way for a board to block a takeover, the only way to stop it from happening is to keep your shareholders very happy all of the time. Now, of course, this can be very good. We do want accountable boards and we want accountable companies. But taken to the extreme that we have in the United Kingdom, actually it can be very damaging. And allow me to give you an example, if I can, with the company, the delivery company Just Eat. So in 2018, the company Just Eat decided to take £50 million of its own profits to reinvest in improving its service, the exact type of thing that we need them to do. The response from the stock market is for the market capitalization of the company to drop by £728 million, because they just took 50 million of their profits and decided to invest it. Now, if you're looking to take over this company, it's just become a bargain because it's now £700 million cheaper. So let me ask you this question. If you were on a board of a company, what would you prioritize? Investment, which can get you fired, or would you prioritize in paying dividends every single moment that you possibly can and forgetting the future? And obviously the answer is that you would do the former, because the thing is, who thinks about 6 years' time when you don't even know whether you're going to have a job in 6 months' time? This is what is strangling productivity growth in the United Kingdom. The good news is that this is the easiest thing in the world for us to resolve. We do not need to form a new government department to manage things and to micromanage the economy. We don't need to take billions of pounds of taxpayers' money to put it into a fund and push public development. All we need to do is allow companies to do the thing that they want to do anyway. We just need to change the law to say that companies can block takeovers for a period of time.
Matthew, I'm going to have to wrap you up, but
sorry.
Thank you very much.
I'm just about to finish, so that's it. So you can allow companies to block it for maybe 5 or 10 years, and this will solve the problem in itself. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So our next speaker this morning is Steve Smith from Bristol. Steve.
Thank you very much. Good morning. First, can I just apologise for being incorrectly dressed this morning? I'm not trying to look stylish by not wearing a tie. I just assumed a helpful lord would buy me one. It turns out that's not the way we do things here. Conference, we have a Labour government which claims at least to understand the importance of growing the economy. It's one of their 5 missions for a sustainable something or other. But they believe that growing the economy is something that governments do. Moreover, they believe that governments grow the economy by putting up taxes, by making it harder to employ people, and by pushing up the price of energy. We know better. We know that governments don't grow economies, businesses do it. And the best thing that government can do is to create the right conditions and get out of the way. Lowering taxation, lowering the burden of regulation on businesses, and investing in the infrastructure that allows businesses to do what they do best. And it's infrastructure that I want to focus on today. With the exception of a few grand schemes, infrastructure is predominantly local. And it's local leaders, local government, who are best placed to understand the needs of the regions that they serve and to get the right infrastructure in place to allow businesses to grow. Now, where I live in Bristol, that means the West of England Combined Authority. But it's hamstrung. It's hamstrung partly by having a useless Labour mayor, but we can deal with that next May at the ballot box. But it's also hamstrung by how it's funded. It has a huge budget, but most of the money it manages is controlled by Whitehall. A civil servant will come up with the idea that it would be lovely if we had more bus stops or cycle lanes or park benches or whatever the flavour of the month is. They create a pot of money to fund it, and the authority gets to bid for a share of that pot. And if they're lucky enough to get it, they're then accountable to Whitehall for exactly how they spend it, even to the point where sometimes they have to give it back if they haven't spent the right money on the right things. Now, the upshot of all of this is not only that we create a whole industry with the authority managing 5 or 6 of these pots at one time and local and national Sir Humphreys spending hours writing reports to each other, but it means that the investment going into the West of England and all over the country isn't based on the priorities of the West of England and what our local businesses need to grow. It's based on the priorities of Whitehall. Now, we got this wrong when we were in government. Labour shows no signs of understanding it. So the next Conservative government needs to make a priority of taking that existing funding, I'm not asking for more money, take that existing funding and put it in the hands of local leaders who understand their areas and know where to invest it. Those local leaders should be accountable to the people who elected them and not accountable to Whitehall civil servants. If we can unleash local leadership for local investment, they will unleash business, and that will drive economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'm going to call on Jonathan Hall from Lichfield, but after Jonathan speaks, we'll open it up to the floor, so please be ready to come forward with any contributions that you wish to make. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Conference. There are an estimated 4.25 million self-employed people in the UK today. Before the pandemic, it was 5 million. Britain has moved on from being a nation of shopkeepers to become a nation of participants in the gig economy. Now, socialists hate self-employment. They'll tell you that on average the self-employed earn less and that it prevents people from benefiting from the myriad of employment rights they're proposing to saddle employers with. You won't get enhanced familial rights. You won't get statutory working hours or even, if your business does badly, the minimum wage. But you will have the satisfaction of being your own boss, choosing your own hours, and yes, working from home and looking after your family if that's what you choose. If you are self-employed, you have taken back control. What Gen Z calls the side hustle suits the British character and is profoundly conservative, entrepreneurial activity. So why then have successive Conservative administrations acquiesced with the Treasury in seeking to stamp it out? Why? Because of tax. The Treasury prefers a world which deducts its taxation at source. It persists with a hugely complicated and plainly unfit for purpose national insurance system and dislikes the fact that this works poorly for the self-employed. They see self-employment as a gateway drug for tax evasion. They want businesses to use expensive computer programs to submit VAT returns based on accruals accounting, not cash receipts and expenditure, as so many small companies find. The Treasury prefers businesses that can employ tax accountants and deal with the complications of tax and payroll and NIC. So they use IR35 to push the self-employed to incorporate small companies, submit to PAYE, and employ their own accountants to navigate the minefields of reporting and tax on dividends. My solution is straightforward. Don't stigmatise the self-employed. Give them a way to easily report their earnings. Do it quarterly, online, via a simple return and on a scalable income tax percentage. Do it on a cash basis, payable quarterly, and when a person's income exceeds the VAT threshold, collect that using the same return. When the self-employed are ready to incorporate, give them the opportunity to use a similar system if it suits them until they're big enough to cope. Growth starts with enterprising people, people who are our sort of people, sometimes at a kitchen table, sometimes in a shared workspace, sometimes in a small workshop. Encourage that enterprise. Don't shackle it and strangle it with unnecessary administration and red tape. And then, as the side hustles turn into main hustles, our economy will grow.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I'm going to invite members to come to one of the 4 microphone points there, and I'll take them in order. But Laura, do you want to contribute, or do you want to respond to any of those points made so far?
Well, I think what we've heard so far is far more sense about the economy than we've seen for the entire first couple of months from the Labour government. If they've put half as much thought into what they were going to do when they actually got into power, as we've seen this morning, the country would be in a much better state.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So I'm going to take somebody from microphone 1, and then microphone 2, 3, and 4, and then we'll keep rotating around. So, sir.
Thank you. My name is Mike Ballinger from Coventry. I was expecting to speak from the stage, so what I'm doing is perhaps slightly different. I shall talk briefly about the importance of the role of SMEs, a sector from which I recently retired. Each small and medium enterprise is a vital part of the economy, and it's vital that we grow the economy to create the wealth and resources that we need for the ever-growing public services that we need. The SME sector is so often neglected, and yet huge numbers of people work for SMEs. The sector helps grow the economy and can be even more successful if it is given the tools, and no, my dad was not a tool maker. Firstly, we need better education and training for directors and managers. We need high-quality training, such as a short degree in business administration, an SCBA to put after your name. This will be delivered at universities and FE colleges. In just 1 year, a course will deliver month-long modules on subjects such as sales and marketing, health and safety, contract law, accounts, customer relations, HR, and the like. This short degree will be taken after the normal traditional vocational and academic courses in much the same way as a teacher's PGCE is done. It would enable managers to get the practical skills and knowledge to be able to do their job well. Secondly, to grow our companies, we need skilled and able people for our technical and vocational workforces. It is time to put further education colleges and their staff on the same pay and financing as schools and universities. FE courses need to be made prestigious and challenging so they can deliver the workforce we need, and for the qualifications to be seen as just as vital as a university degree. And thirdly, others have picked up on this already, there's a wealth of talent out there that lies so often unused. I'm talking about all those people with mental and physical health challenges who find it so hard to access the workplace. SMEs don't have the training departments and large HR departments to handle these situations. Yet there's a willingness amongst SMEs to employ people with challenges, but we need help. Not to be referred to an incomprehensible website, but we need face-to-face help from mentors with cash grants, and importantly, with a level of understanding and empathy. With these tools and others, and of course the right tax environment, SMEs can help grow our economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And speaker from number 2, please.
Tim Troman, Hexham, Northumberland, and a small business owner. Conference. Britain needs growth, but the right type of growth. Expansion of the economy by large businesses employing low-cost foreign labour is not sustainable if individually we're all getting poorer. The focus must be on per capita GDP. In 2010, there were 4.5 million private sector businesses in the UK. This peaked at 6 million prior to COVID before falling to 5.5 million in 2022. The last Department for Trade and Business figures show some recovery to 5.6 million before the election. But that is still over 1 million new businesses added to the economy since 2010, an increase of 24%, a proud record over successive Conservative governments. Not all businesses, however, carry the same weight in the statistics. Just 8,000 of the 5.6 million, or just 0.14%, are large businesses employing more than 250 people. These 8,000 businesses account for 56% of corporation tax and 40% of all private sector employment. Government growth policies have, however, all too often been focused on this minority. Individually, they're easier for the Treasury to deal with, and individually they generate more tax per business. But the remaining 60% of private sector employment, 44% of business tax receipts, are SMEs. Similar theme. 4 million of those, or 74% of all private sector businesses in the UK, did not employ anyone other than the owner in 2023. Given the right policies, it is from this group that our best hope of sustainable growth in the UK economy will occur. Government does not create growth, only the conditions for which growth can occur. Tax and regulation play a major role, but individuals have to take the risk with their own money, or taking on debt, or giving up a well-paid job. The reward for success is freedom, not only financial, but the power to make your own decisions, either as an individual business owner or as an employee. A very powerful message of enterprise for our younger generation of entrepreneurs. Today, the world's top 6 companies by market capitalisation were all startups during my working life, all American, all technology-based, and all started by 1 or 2 individuals taking the same initial risks.
Sir, I'm going to have to wrap you up, I'm afraid.
Sorry. I'm just saying that if we just get some of those 4 million up and running, that would fix the economy.
Thank you very much. I'm going to invite the speaker at number 3 and then number 4, but the shorter we make the contributions, the more members we can get in this morning. Thank you.
Jeremy Maddox from Chelsea, Kensington, Fulham constituency. Ladies and gentlemen, did anyone see the documentary Strike, an Uncivil War, about the 1984 miners' strike on Netflix? I don't know if anyone's seen that, but it tells the story of the strikers during that dispute. But in retelling the story, there is one omission which is glaring. The entire period from 1974 to 1979 was omitted. The unions had a stranglehold of Britain, currency collapse, humiliating rescue by the IMF, winter of discontent, the dead left unburied, rubbish mountains in Leicester Square. Hull was dubbed the second Stalingrad. It was against this backdrop that Margaret Thatcher had to re-establish democracy and the rule of law. The National Union of Mine Workers saw itself as an alternative government and had to be defeated. Big bang in the city, rent reform, currency restrictions, axed on day one, privatisations and competition. Lower taxes, unions forced to accept democracy and the rights of ordinary working people. Her legacy lasted many years, including into the Blair times. All of that is now being reversed. Unions make their demands and the government follows. Beer and sandwiches in number 10, or more likely a fancy dress party with free suits for all. There are 14 people vying for every rental property as landlords have been turned into pariahs. Builders can't build because they aren't allowed to make a profit, and profit has become evil. Britain is becoming a nation of needers and not givers. Wealth creators are invited to leave the country, and business is gradually being renationalised or monopolised. Which industries are the cause of so many scandals, strikes and problems? The post office, state monopoly. Railways, public-private monopolies. Water companies, monopolies. Healthcare, monopoly. And the BBC, so vastly overfunded that it is a virtual news monopoly. As Conservatives, we need a new vision. We need to build on the success of Margaret Thatcher and go further. Competition is anathema to socialists. It sets people free, it removes the need for state interference, it makes everyone better off. So let us embrace competition for the next Conservative government in all areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got time for one more intervention, and then I'm going to ask Laura to wrap up. So, sir, number 4.
Hi there. I'm Max Powell for Twickenham Conservative Association. I would like to advocate the development of a more robust industrial strategy. This could and needs to appeal to the voters, and I believe that manufacturing in the UK should be an important part of that strategy. Why manufacturing? It's obvious, because it supports a wide range of jobs, and those jobs can be all over the country. Government needs to focus on the horizontal, the things that will provide a solid foundation for manufacturers and will support multiple sectors. That strategy should target some obvious goals that have already been talked about. For example, the cost of energy, the cost of a factory, the burden of regulation should all be aligned with the US. And that should be a fundamental intention of the strategy. This strategy should be a first-order strategy. So other policies, other strategies should flex to support that strategy. So this department, the department driving an industrial strategy, should be one of the most important in government. Things like decarbonisation should flex to enable that policy to massively increase the amount of manufacturing in this country and drive accelerated growth across the UK. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm actually going to invite number 2, if you can do it in a short, 30 seconds or so, to give Laura a chance to respond.
Tunbridge Wells. Where do we need investment? One of the most obvious areas is the water industry. We've not built a new reservoir for 40 years. We've got sewage on our beaches and in our rivers. Who's been in charge of the country? Our party for the last 13 or 14 years. We've had Ofwat. There's 244 people in Ofwat. How many of them even own a spade, leave alone help dig a new reservoir? When you speak to people in Ofwat, they said they were told by the government to keep prices down. Why did we not appoint a Conservative to get the water industry under control and get investment going? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So, I'm now going to invite Laura to sum up from our debate this morning.
Well, Conference, it's lovely to be here today, and thank you for joining us this morning for the economy session. We've had some fantastic contributions. Today, we are less than 3 months into a Labour government, and already many of our worst fears are being realised, as Jeremy so brilliantly reminded us up there, especially when it comes to the topic that we are discussing here today, the economy. Now, during the election campaign, many of you may have seen in a press conference that I warned that if Labour won the election, they would cynically claim that public finances they inherited were somehow far worse than they anticipated in order to justify tax rises. And Conference, that's exactly what they have done. The Chancellor is making ridiculous claims, one of which is that she inherited the worst economic circumstances since the Second World War. A cursory inspection of the numbers will tell you that this is simply not true. In 2010, when we took over from Labour, unemployment was at 8%. What was it at the election? 4%. The rate of unemployment halved. In 2010, the deficit was at 10% of GDP. What was it at the election? 4.4%. The deficit as a share of the GDP more than halved. In 2010, inflation was at 3.4%. What was it at the election? 2%, which is not quite halving, but back at the Bank of England's target. And Labour inherited the fastest growing economy in the G7. Conference, we left the economy in a better place than we found it, and we must never stop reminding the Labour government of that. Of course, the job was far from finished, but a corner had been turned. And in contrast, since taking office, Labour have done nothing but talk the British economy down. And their political scaremongering is having a real-world impact, hitting business investment and consumer confidence. No responsible government should ever do that. This is not the government of service that was promised to us. It's a government of self-service, who will always put politics first. One rule for them, one for everyone else. They talk down the economy because they think it makes them look better. Never mind the impact that it's having on you, your families, your businesses, and your jobs. Labour will put taxes up so that they don't raise any money, purely to do some political point scoring. Labour will increase borrowing, even though they promised that their plans were fully funded and they wouldn't fiddle the figures, because they won't make the tough choices needed on welfare and make the public sector more efficient. Melissa is right. It is businesses, not bureaucracy, that create jobs. Labour will disrupt children's education mid-year because they need to appease a wing of their party. Labour will tell us that the economy is in the doldrums, even when we're the fastest growing economy in the G7, so they can justify punitive actions at the budget. It's the same old Labour party first, country a distant second. So what should we do? We heard some brilliant contributions today. This Labour government should stop spinning economic gloom for political advantage, taxing education and punishing pensioners, and should instead give the economy the support it needs. Work to promote investment, boost competitiveness and foster growth across the country. They should boost self-employment, as Jonathan suggests, put more emphasis on SMEs, as Mike and Tim so brilliantly put forward, and actually, interestingly, as the CDU have done in Germany to great effect. The point Steve made about local government financing, I think, is very important. I think there's a big debate that we need to have about local government actually raising their own money and being incentivised to reinvest. It's a conservative way of doing things, rather than just handing out money from the top. And as Steve said, putting too many red tape and restrictions around it and not allowing local government to thrive. The industrial strategy point was very well made too. Labour also needs to take our plans to crack down on welfare and boost productivity, as Matthew set out so perfectly in his contribution, so they could keep taxes and borrowing down and yet still support public services on which we all rely. Labour need to stop giving inflation-busting pay rises to train drivers on 60k a year and start giving winter fuel payments back to pensioners on just 13k. Conference, we must fight the damage that they are trying to do to the economy. The economic wrong-headedness that tells us that we spent too much, but what they're going to do in government is spend more. It's nonsense. The conversation we have today has never been more important. The conversation we're having as a party over who our next leader is has never been more important. And I think what we've shown today is that debate is alive and well. I hope that the conversations that we continue to have as we go through this in conference focus on the economy, because it is what matters to people at home. It's what matters to us. It's what matters to our future, of our children, and what we are able to hand on to them. So thank you for taking the time to talk and engage in this debate today. And I really appreciate all the contributions that have been put forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Can I end today by thanking you for responding to the debate, thanking our party chairman, Richard Fuller, for being the advocate to bring back member debates. But mostly, thank you to all of our speakers and to all of you who've attended. I'm sure this won't be the last time we have member debates at conference, and thank you for being part of that comeback. Laura, thank you very much.
Thank you. Lovely to see you all.